Good evening, guys, and welcome out to Revolution. So this video is called Examining Pseudo-Jerome Prologue, 1 John 5:7-8, the Johannine comma, and the Latin by TurretinFan, part 1. And so TurretinFan dropped a video about 8 hours ago, and he was talking about the prologue of 1 John, or basically what is called the Catholic epistles. And so in this prologue, it is mentioned about the Father, the Word, and the Spirit. And so we're going to read through that prologue. We're going to examine it, and we're also going to examine the claims of TurretinFan in this. Now, one of the reasons why I'm doing this video is because I know that TurretinFan is has done this because of some of the claims that I've made, but also some of the back and forward that we've had over the years about certain things. This has come up, and so I've got a whole bunch of things ready to look at, but what I'll do is I'll just check the comments and then we'll start. So Hilly Billy is living the dream. He says it's 5:45 in Eastern United States, so it's very early. So all the early birds are up watching this. He's taking his wife to work shortly. Have a great stream. Welcome to Revolution with Nick Sayers. Please like, share, subscribe, and participate. So Anathema 1611 is saying, let's go. And Hudson has his popcorn out and he is waiting in anticipation to see what happens. And so let's begin this video. Now, I'll just check all my vitals, and I will check the chat to make sure that the sound is reasonable. And so usually I go about halfway with YouTube, and it seems to work very well. Let's full screen it, and here we go.
1, 2, 3.
Now, if you guys can hear thunder in the background, we have a really gnarly storm brewing, and some of these storms here in Australia, they can cut the power out. So I just I noticed the storm was coming about 10 minutes ago, so hopefully it doesn't cut the power out.
Greetings, one and all. I'm glad you're here, tuned in for the 37th episode of 2025 of the Conversations in Calvinism podcast. Unfortunately, I won't be joined this evening by my good friend Dan, but not because of any falling out from last week's hot episode, but simply just because our schedules didn't align this week. It's a holiday week in the States, and that explains it. So you may notice that down here, there are some comments that are coming across from YouTube and some of the other streams as well, feeding in. So we'll be able to see folks who comment instantly, or essentially instantly. So thanks to Paul Chappelle, who says, hello, TurretinFan, and the Daily Gripe 2504, who just waved. I'm glad to see you here. Tonight's episode, the plan, at least, is to discuss the Pseudo-Jerome prologue to the Catholic epistles, 1 John 5, 7, and 8, which is mentioned in that prologue, the Johannine comma, which is part of those verses. Yes, aka Algo PC. Good to see you, Algo. And good to see you, Frenny Cosmic Ontogeny, an even longer version of the same name. Maybe it's just a variant, a textual variant of the name. Good to see you here. So we're going to be talking about the Johannine comma. That means the phrase that belonged to John or didn't, and then the Latin. Sometimes we hear these stories, anecdotes, if you will, stories, legends, myths, things like, oh, well, yeah, there's not much evidence for the Johannine comma in the Greek, but it's all over the place in the Latin. And yeah, it's actually not that strong in the Latin either, although more numerous in some of the later versions. Friend says he didn't change his name. It was the original name. I don't know why. Sometimes it shows the whole thing. It's not. Well, I don't know either. No, I'm not sure. But anyway, good to see you and good to know the entire cosmic ontogeny of your name, your etymology. So, by the way, before we get to the business at hand, the UBS 6 Reader's Edition has arrived. So if you want to check it out, UBS 6, a Reader's Edition, has the Greek New Testament. Of course, when it comes to the text of 1 John 5, it won't have this insertion. And of course, at Revelation 16:5, it won't have the substitution that Theodore Beza made. There's lots of other differences and changes and so forth from various perspectives, but it's an interesting publication. You'll notice that it's designed towards English readers. And so if you've ever checked out this Reader's Edition version, see it has English headings of the sections, and in the bottom, words that are infrequent words that are defined in the footnotes, and sometimes defined with Greek synonyms, I think, and sometimes just with the meanings. Also, Houghtons or Houghtons, I'm actually not sure how.
I usually say Hugh Houghton, and that, I don't know where I got that from. It might have been from Heaven Jones.
I pronounce his name H.A.G. Houghton. His textual commentary on the Greek New Testament is here, and it's a pleasure to read it. It's not necessarily the kind of thing you might read front to back, but maybe you would. I don't know. Depends on the person, I guess. But for me, it's more of a reference material. And the 1 John 5:7-8 section, he begins, the external evidence, the absence of the phrase known as the Johannine comma or comma Johanneum from Greek tradition is overwhelming. And he's right. The shorter text adopted here is attested in all majuscules and the majority of minuscules. Out of 509 witnesses, 500 are listed in support of the form. 4 others are illegible, or omissive. The earliest attestation of the additional text is in Latin.
So just so you know, on my website, which I think I've got linked here, I should pull that away actually. There we go. And I just want to show you my pages that I have. Where are we? Here we go. Main page, 1 John 5:7, and index of comma Johanneum articles. So if you go to 1 John 5:7, at the top, I've got a link to this page, index to Johannine comma articles, and it will talk about all sorts of things. So I've got one on Jerome here. Now, if you go down to the bottom, I've just made 2 new pages. One is the Johannine comma and Greek manuscripts, and the Johannine comma and Latin manuscripts. And so I've only just started these. So now this has been floating around for a few years now. So this was James Snap Jr.'s blog, and Timothy Berg seems to be the source of this. And so what I've started to do is hyperlink all these manuscripts. And you can click on those and it will go to some information that I put on there. Now, what we're realizing is, say, if you go to Mike Ferrando's work, he's clearly pointed out, like, say, minuscule 2 is mentioned to omit the comma, but it actually is only a Gospels manuscript. So minuscule 36 is mentioned to omit the comma, but it's actually only Gospel manuscript. And then minuscule 2:473 is mentioned to omit the comma, but has the comma in it, as the list including the comma states. So yeah, 2473, say for example, is mentioned up here, but then it's mentioned again down here to, or is it? Let me just check. Was it 2473? Yeah, so it appears again. You can hear the lightning cracking in the background there. So I've only just started to really look through these, and already I'm seeing lots of holes in all this. And the work that Mike Ferrando's done, he's basically gone through like the earliest ones, and he's proven quite a lot of interesting things. That sometimes when you look at these manuscripts, you can't decipher whether the comma's in there or not. It's in such disrepair. Others don't even have 1 John 5 in it, so you can cross them off the list. And so I guess when TurretinFan's mentioning this, it makes you wonder where this list came from that Hugh Houghton has. And so, and also we're looking at the Latin. So I'll just crack that one open, which isn't as detailed. If you ever go to my page and that happens, resource limit just means there's so many people on the site. I think I've had like 127 million people on my website. So I haven't designed it to be that big, but it's just, it caves in every now and then. So yeah, we've got, Cultish Fuldensis in the prologue, and we're going to talk about that tonight. 7th century Leon, Palimpsest, Codex, Frisingensis, and yeah, all these others. So we're putting all of this together as well, where we're looking at Latin manuscripts, and hopefully too, I'll be able to have like nice pictures and all the rest of it, like I do with most of my articles. This is just like a little stub at the moment, just to put my foot in the door and say, okay, we're gonna start focusing on some of these. So I'll close those now. I might just open the Jerome page. So I've got the prologue there. A few other people talking about it. Erasmus in his Annotationis. But let's continue with TurretinFan.
And he gives the Latin. And indeed, it is a Latin interpolation, although he points out a version of it, which is the In Christ Jesus version. There's several versions of this insertion, a lot of different variants, you could say, of it. But we're going to try to get into a little bit of that today. We're not going to resolve the whole issue to the satisfaction of the King James advocates, of course, but that's not the point of this particular episode. The point of this particular episode is I've been hearing mostly from one guy that I listen to, and if you...
Sorry, I muted myself there because I've got a storm. That would be me that he's talking about.
He shows up here and wants to be named. I'm happy to name him. The point isn't to try to hide who it is, as much as to make it not about that person, because it's not about the person, but about the issue. The issue is this prologue. Now, one guy has been going around saying that it is Jerome, and that he believes it really is Jerome. It's not Pseudo-Jerome. And I'm sorry to say, that's just not correct. It's Pseudo-Jerome. And there's a reason why that it hasn't been adopted as being part of Jerome's writings. There's more than one reason, but there are reasons for it. It's not like people just don't want it to be part of Jerome's works because they think it's going to somehow support the issue of the Johannine comma, because ultimately we all know that at some point in history the Johannine comma was inserted, and I think
and so this is where it gets to the stage where when you show evidence for the comma, there is already a presupposition that it is not genuine, that it was inserted, that it was from the Latin, it became a gloss in the margin, and later on it was translated back into Greek. And people believe this type of stuff. Like even the other day, I was looking at an early attestation before Cyprian, and even ChatGPT basically said to me, well, it's impossible for that to happen because Cyprian put it in the text. So you're creating an anachronism here. And so even ChatGPT has embedded into it, because the vast majority of material out there about the comma is negative. So ChatGPT picks up on that, and it's saying, well, you can't have a reading of the comma before Cyprian because he invented it, sort of thing. And it's like, no, that's a presupposition. And I was sort of trying, when you would chat GPT and you're like, please try and think outside the box, but it never does. And so that's what I find when we're looking at this information. Like TurretinFan just said, we all know that it was inserted at some time. Like it just didn't exist. And someone went, wow, that sounds pretty, or that sounds orthodox, and they just put it in. Where I think what that does, it actually destroys the ability for people to look at this text and to say, hey, this the possibility of this being a genuine reading that they were talking about is high. And so one thing is, like when we come to the woman caught in adultery story, people like Dan Wallace, James White, Stephen Boyce, I'm not sure what TurretinFan thinks about this, but they will say this is actually a story that Jesus did. So the woman caught in adultery story is one of those 12-verse chunks of text that they want to delete from the critical text. So the last 12 verses are Mark and the woman caught in adultery. But what you'll find, say, with the comma, every step of the way, everything is doubted, everything is questioned, oh no, and there's always some sort of, wow, that was very close lightning. I don't know if you guys heard that, but it was pretty close. There's always some sort of anecdote that comes with that, so that people won't work with the material that's in front of them. They will. There's an anecdote made up about every step of the way with the comma. But when it comes to woman caught in adultery, Dan Wallace will turn around and say, yeah, Jesus actually did that. We believe Jesus did that, but it's just not part of John. And it's like, so you're basically saying that Jesus actually did that. The woman caught in adultery is a true story, but it's not canonical. I mean, how close do you have to be? It's not even, John wrote that, or one of John's disciple, Polycarp, said, yeah, it was genuine, or anything like that. They're saying this, we agree, it goes all the way back, but it's not part of the Bible. And it's like, how do you determine that? How do you say it's not part of the Bible? Where it seems so strange that on that story, they will go that far, all the way back, and say, yeah, well, Jesus did that. But it's just not in the Bible. But when it comes to 1 John 5:7, I find that they won't give one little bit. It's like Cyprian quoted it, and it's like, no, Cyprian didn't quote it. He made it up there. That's where it originates from. So you find stuff before Cyprian, and it's like, well, it's not exactly every single word, as if every allusion to a text has to be, every little detail has to be absolutely perfect for it to be a genuine allusion to the comma. But anyway, I'll let TurretinFan continue.
Houghton, it's terrible that I don't know his name, or the right pronunciation of his name. Anyway, for any cosmic ontology, he says, as someone who has done no research at all and knows nothing, I insist that it is an actual Jerome. Thanks, friend. Then Paul Lochapel says, he who must not be named. Yeah, it's not about he who must not be named. I don't mean to be rude or anything.
So the reason, like, I understand, like, he's having a bit of a dig at me, and whoever's in the chat is having a dig and saying that I haven't studied this. Now, I've studied this enough to know that it is Jerome. I've studied this enough to have my own opinions on it. And I've probably, at this moment in time, studied it probably more than TurretinFan has. But I haven't studied it enough to go, okay, I really want to debate on this subject, because there's so much more to know on this topic. And I know TurretinFan, he's saying we should have a debate on it. one of the things is I've said, well, maybe we should talk about it like what we're doing now, so that we get to a certain level where we're not Googling things and trying to figure things out. Because at the end of the day, the reason why I think it's genuinely Jerome is because of Erasmus. And Erasmus quotes it. He doesn't doubt that it's genuine. He had manuscripts in front of him that had the prologue, and he thought that was one of the things that persuaded him to go with the comma. And when you read his annotations, he's very clear about that. There are other reasons why I think it's genuine. Also, the fact that it was pronounced Pseudo-Jerome, but when Codex Valdensis was re-examined and they looked at the prologue, saw the comma there, the status of the Vulgate was not changed, in a sense where the Codex Valdensis is dated to 546. Now, some people say 544, 545, but from what I can see, it's 546. And so Codex Valdensis is very early, and it's got this prologue there, but it's just not early enough for some people. I don't know. Like, it's sort of like, that's only like, 150 years after Jerome, so it's probably not him, sort of thing. And I'm like, how early do we have to be? It's like, it's so early. And also the whole concept that we're going to see that TurretinFan brings up on the Father's True Monarchy, and it's actually a Jehovah's Witness website. But I don't mind TurretinFan going there. I go there myself to look at the contrary arguments by people who are against the Trinity and against this verse specifically. So I'm not saying that TurretinFan is going there specifically because it's Jehovah's Witness. And he mentions that. He's like, I don't know who wrote this. But at the end of the day, I've gone there myself many times, and I've seen the whole argument there with omitting where there is the O and the M issue that's been changed to a C, and an M has been taken out in the prologue. But I've also looked at what Grantley MacDonald says about that at the bottom of the page, and so he is actually a Latin expert, which is I know he's a contra. I know he's an atheist as well, so he's not a believer, but he does have a little bit of weight when it comes to the Latin, and so we're gonna do some of those things. So I'll let TurretinFan just continue.
If he knows who he is, I've challenged him to debate this subject, and we'll see if he does. But and if he shows up here and wants to be named, that's fine too. It's not about trying to not hide it. It's just about not making it personal about that guy. So it's not written by Jerome, and
so I've got no problem with TurretinFan doing this video, mentioning me or not mentioning me, whatever. I guess one of the things is, in some of James White's material, I had brought up the fact that he never mentioned who I was. He would just call me the TR guy, so no one would be able to verify what was said. See, TurretinFan doesn't jump on here and say a bunch of stuff that I've never said, where James White would do that type of thing and say, oh, do you know this guy believes this, and he thinks this, and this is crazy, and this, and it's like, TurretinFan doesn't do that. He might, we have disagreements, but he's way more charitable than most of the opponents that I've ever had. Sifted Sand says, good morning all, and Nick, may God bless everyone in the mighty name of Jesus. Sussex for Christ says, you are over the target in my opinion. The prologue is a real threat to their position. Why does TurretinFan not use your name? Weird. Or I guess it's just because he doesn't want to make it an attack piece, which is fine. And also too, sometimes it can detract from just what you're trying to say, because then people are like, oh, Revelation 16:5, or they focus on other things that I've talked about or believe, instead of just focusing on the point,
This has been known for a long, long time. However, it was attributed to Jerome up to around the break of the Reformation, from somewhere in the, it's hard to say exactly, but somewhere around the 900s or 1000 AD until then, it was increasingly identified with Jerome. And the person who came up with it, although they don't come right out in the earliest copies and say, this is by Jerome in so many words, they put little things in there that are intended to make you, the reader, think, oh, this must be by Jerome, even though it has very little to do with being a prologue to the Catholic epistles. But there's a couple of issues why, and his whole worldview is crumbling. Sorry to do that. All right, so there's a all right, we're having lots of fun, and that's a good thing, I suppose. So let's share the screen. What I've done here with the screen share is I have shared my own blog because, you know, that's how I roll. But this is a blog that I wrote some time ago in August, and the Pseudo-Jerome prologue to the Catholic epistles. At the time, I was mostly interested in this because I've been hearing the same thing. I've been hearing people say, is Jerome the author of this prologue, and what did Jerome say? And there were a couple of things. Partly I was interested because I was hearing it quoted one way, and I was hearing it quoted, and that's ways, as it turns out, is not correct. And then I've also been hearing it quoted as Jerome, when I was pretty suspicious that it's not Jerome, because I've read the other things that Jerome wrote, and it's not quite the same thing as what Jerome wrote.
Okay, so one thing I just want to say about the whole concept of, well, I don't think it's genuinely this person, because I've looked at some other stuff that they've written or whatever, and it just doesn't seem right. You know, this type of thing. We get this with the last 12 verses of Mark, because there's such slim attestation against those verses. Usually the internal evidence has to be beefed up a bit. And oftentimes people will say, well, it's not in the style of Mark. But then you would get Maurice Robinson and a whole bunch of majority text guys, and they'll turn around and say, well, we think that it is Mark because he uses a lot of language that Mark uses. So they're basically saying the exact opposite thing, but using the same argument. And to me, I think both sides are sort of grasping at the wind in a sense where I don't think that they are experts on the language. And the thing is, if I read something that's by Abraham Lincoln, and I might have read all of Abraham Lincoln's material, like I might have read it all the way through once, it doesn't make me an expert on what he's saying. And everything's got to be taken into consideration. And just because they say something that's a little bit left field, it doesn't negate the fact that it could be them. Like they're not going to use the same language all the way through. And when it comes to Mark, I mean, the resurrections just happened. Some disciples have seen Jesus, and they say, well, we saw him in another form. So James White says, see, this is Gnosticism because he's in a form like the shack sort of thing. And it's just like, to me, it's a terrible way to, throw a verse out or keep a verse in based on this criteria, because I don't know anyone personally. Well, I guess I don't know anyone like who knows the language that well, like even English. Like sometimes I'm writing things and I read back over it and go, wow, that was really well written. Then I read something else and I'm like, oh, that was really sloppy. But if you put them together, people would think that I ChatGPT'd one and wrote the other one, at midnight, on a Wednesday or something. And it's like, how do you know, this? Are you an expert in this type of thing? Because I just don't, like when it comes to people doing that with like the last 12 verses of Mark, to me, I just go, how can you do this? And usually the way this is done, it's like, well, they don't usually use this particular word here in this type of context, and so they can never do it. But there's plenty of places, even in scripture, where there's just one word. It's a hapex legomenon. It appears once. They've decided to use that particular word in that particular place, and it's a standalone thing, and it happens all the time in scripture, let alone just in writing. I'm sure I could do a video tonight and mention a whole bunch of things that weren't in my previous video or weren't in my previous 10 videos, but it doesn't mean that I'm not the one doing it, you know. And so, and I just don't, I don't like it when people are using this type of methodology to say that someone's written something or someone hasn't. Now, can people get to that type of understanding? Yes, they can. When we look at people who are experts, like say someone like Lorenzo Valla. Lorenzo Valla, he looked at the donation of Constantine, saw there were anachronistic statements there that wouldn't have been used around the time of the so-called creation of the donation of Constantine, or around the time of Constantine. And he just pointed out, hang on, some of these words are, you know, they're not around the time of Constantine. These are much later. So this is a forgery. And once he brought that out, a lot of people looked into it, experts in the Latin language, and they said, yeah, this has got problems. Actually, I'm not sure. Yeah, I think the donation of Constantine, I'm not sure if it was just translated into the Greek, or there was a Greek copy of it, or it was originally in Greek. I can't remember those details, but I know it does have the comma Johannine in it, which is weird in itself, because why it's written basically to the Greek church. Why would they use this verse if it wasn't considered a genuine verse? So the Greeks considered it a genuine verse, but then it was dropped, and so. But that's a whole nother issue. But some people can get to the point where they look at things, they can spot forgeries and that type of thing. But we're talking about like Lorenzo Valla. Like when we're talking about someone like Erasmus, we're like, okay, I don't know anyone on the textual critical scene who's anything like, say, like an Erasmus. Like I wouldn't even say they're 5% of someone like Erasmus, you know. And so that's why I'm like, you know, if I turned around and say, well, this is Jerome because he mentions this word here, back here, and all the rest of it, and I've got this type of argument where it's, you know, there's a lot of words that match up with his previous comments. I just don't find that convincing at all, whether it's positive or negative. And so arguments for the last 12 verses are marked from like people like Maurice Robinson and you know, Hodges and Farstead and that crew. To me, the positive arguments are just as bad as the negative arguments, and it does show you that these people can use that same methodology and just come to completely the opposite conclusion. And so when I hear TurretinFan, like I know TurretinFan is good in his Latin translations of work. I really appreciate some of the work that he's done on like Revelation 1:4 and things like that, which sort of just basically confirmed the way that I was looking at Revelation 1:4, but trying to decipher it in the Latin. Now, even since 2016, when I wrote my first article, I guess you'd call it, on Revelation 16:5, the ability to just throw something into ChatGPT or Grok or even Google Translate and how it's been tidied up quite a lot, that's a huge advantage to doing this type of work. Because I remember I was putting in stuff that Erasmus had said into Google Translate, and it was so weird. It was backwards. It was just strange, and so I couldn't use a lot of that type of thing. but now there's a lot of accuracy, and I've got no doubt that TurretinFan, he's good on Latin, but is he at that point where he can read through a Latin document and go, I don't think that was written by the same guy as who was writing earlier. To me, it's that is just an argument that's like it's like explaining why you like a work of art. I like that work of art because of this, because of that. Someone else goes, I hate that work of art because of this, because of that. It's very speculative.
And also, a huge suspicion is aroused because the substance of the way it's quoted, the substance is different from Jerome's real opinions about this situation. So it was all kind of a mess. Now, Migne, the editor of one of the most massive patristic works, there's like 200-volume Patrologia Latina, and there's like a 100+ volume Patrologia Graecae that are by Migne, and he includes a translation of, well, not a translation, he includes a printed text of the prologue. He does acknowledge that it's not by Jerome, and he did this in the 1800s, as I recall, or so, but it's been known even longer than that. It's been known well before he published it, but he included it because it's in lots of copies, and he says there's not enough name calling. It can't be Jerome. Well, no, maybe, but that's not the issue. So what I've done is I've gone through Migne and I've provided a translation, my own translation, not necessarily a great translation, but a translation of what Migne has to say. And I'm going to read some of it, comment on it, and we'll go from there. I'm not going to read all of it. You can go to the blog for more, and we'll see some more. There's some more interesting things as well, not just what Migne has to say. But he says this. He says that this prologue is not Jerome's, but a man of a much later age, and almost of the lowest bench, meaning the.
Okay, so we're going to see Migne, who's a Roman Catholic priest who he wrote a lot about the early church writers in Greek and Latin, and many times just had their works printed out so that the average priest could access the early church writings. And so he is one of the reasons why the Roman Catholic Church feel strongly that they can go back to the early church and see their teachings and their doctrines in the patristic writings, because he educated quite a lot of people. So his work is actually pretty good. His commentary, well, yeah, obviously he's got certain biases, but when we look at this, you got to understand that Migne, now Codex Valdensis was only really recollated and sort of discovered to have been finalized in 546. Now I'll just get this up. So Codex Valdensis, also known as the Victor Codex, Codex Bonifatianus, designated by F. So this is a Latin manuscript. Is a New Testament manuscript based on the Latin Vulgate between 541 and 546. So this is the thing. TurretinFan and myself and James White and Dan Wallace and any KJV person, we're all pretty much in agreement with that date. Okay, because it is dated. The Codex is considered the second most important witness to the Vulgate text. It is also the oldest complete witness to the order of the Diatessaron. It is an important witness to any discussion about the authenticity of 1 Corinthians 14, 34 to 35, and the Comma Johanneum. It is one of the earliest dated manuscripts of the New Testament. So it's not just a nothing, like it's one of the earliest dated manuscripts of the New Testament. So it's one of the earliest where we've actually got a date on it, where, Codex Vaticanus, Codex Sinaiticus, it's like, well, like we should really test them to find out, what what millennium they fall into. But and it's also the second most important, according to critical scholars, second most important witness to the Vulgate. Okay, it was corrected until the 2nd of May 546 AD. Now, I'll read this. It contains a diatessaron in lieu of the Gospels. The 23 remaining canonical books of the New Testament, the Epistle to the Laodiceans, a copy of Jerome's prologue to the canonical Gospels. So that's not what we're looking at. It represents the Italian text type. The 4 Gospels are harmonized in a single continuous narrative according to the form of Tatian's diatessaron. Its text is akin to that of Codex Amiatinus. The harmonized gospel text is preceded by a listing of its sections with a summary of their contents, which was copied unchanged from the Old Latin exemplar. From this, it can be determined that the Old Latin source had lacked the genealogy of Jesus, which Victor inserted, but that the source had included the passage of Jesus and the woman caught in adultery. So it's got some very interesting things in it. Now let's go down to, I want to sort of avoid the whole 1 Corinthians 14 thing, which, some people talk about that with Codex Vaticanus, but, and the amulets, which have really been, the whole thing with the amulets, Nehemiah Gordon tested those, and they're from the Reformation period, so I think it's a bit of a nothing burger. Look at this section. The 1 John section omits the Comma Johanneum. Okay. However, the Vulgate prologue to the canonical epistles include a direct reference to the heavenly witnesses, with the prologue written as a first-person epistle from Jerome to Eustochium. In this prologue, unfaithful translators are criticized for the removal of the verse. The prologue is from about 1700 on, had often been attacked as a late forgery, not by Jerome. Okay, so when are we looking at it being said not by Jerome? From about 1700 on. So when you look at people like Erasmus, all the reformers, they saw that as a genuine prologue from Jerome. And so this is the thing, like, there's a lot of weight behind that, because there's a lot of really good scholarship that's looking at this, saying this is from Jerome. Then it's considered to be a late forgery, because, the whole concept of Jerome saying, well, unfaithful scribes, I know TurretinFan pulls me over the coals a little bit for saying scribes, or unfaithful translators. So I guess it just depends on, which edition that you've read. But they are taking out the Father, the Word, and the Spirit. And so it doesn't really line up with a lot of the anti-comma articles that were coming out around this time. So from like 1700 through to, basically the time when Fuldensis was sort of rehashed in 1850, that was it was considered Pseudo-Jerome, and the name is just stuck. And that's the thing. And so TurretinFan's going to go through and sort of talk about why it's Pseudo-Jerome. But to me, it's an anachronism. But let's just keep reading through this. At the time, the earliest extant Vulgate with the prologue was about AD 800. So that would probably be the Lacava Bible, which we'll look at a little bit later. The prologue was noted to be in Codex Fuldensis of AD 546, when the text was published by Ranke, AD 1850. So before 1850, they were saying, the prologue of Jerome is only 800. So then, it's wound back to 546. And it's like, well, it's in the prologue there. And so you can't get around that. Surely that should cause people to go, well, it's a genuine thing from Jerome. It's very close. I mean, what year was the Vulgate? Was it 405? When usually that's on most websites, when it talks about the date of certain things. So say 405 to 546, it's not a huge amount of time. But even then, people go, well, it's not even in Jerome's lifetime and all this sort of stuff. It's like, oh, okay, it's got to be in his lifetime now. So that the criteria just gets so strict, because before they had all this really good argumentation. It's only in like the year 800 that this type of thing was written. And so let's look at the history. Victor of Capua, he died in 544, reports that he found an old Latin harmony of the Gospels, which he recognized as following Tatian's arrangement of the Diatessaron. He substituted the Vulgate text for the Old Latin, appending the rest of the New Testament books from the standard Vulgate. And so Boniface acquired the Codex in 745 and gave it to the monastic library in Fulda in Germany, or I guess Fulda in Germany, where you just got to do the accent and you can get it right, where it remains to this present day, hence the name of the Codex. It served as the source for the vernacular harmonies in the Old High German and Anglo-Saxon. According to Malcolm Parks, glosses to James are Boniface's own handwriting. Codex Sangallensis 56 was copied in the 9th century from the Diatessaron of the Codex Fuldensis. It also contains some extracts from the Acts of the Apostles. So Ernest Ranke published the text of the Codex in 1868. Okay, so here it says it was in 1850, but without a little footnote. But here it has a footnote, and it's definitely got 1868. Okay, so yeah, and it does tend to be backed up. And we'll have a quick look at that manuscript in archive or manuscript, that book. Ranke, so it's all in Latin. Yeah. Okay, maybe it's talking about another. No. Codex Fuldensis. Okay, yep, that is Codex Fuldensis. Yep. So most people go, okay, well, this is from, they've worked out where it's from, but the thing that's a forgery, of course, is the thing that talks about 1 John 5:7. It's Pseudo-Jerome, So that's an interesting thing. So let's just shut that down. I'll move that away. And let's continue listening to Milne talk about this.
Lowest authority. More recent critics and even Martianus himself prove with such certain arguments that if we should not wish to allow this very thing, we might seem to be doing what has already been done. For indeed, the whole context of the speech cries out, badly patched together here and there from scraps of Jerome, the style itself unpolished, where the author adds certain things of his own, the sentences loose and smelling of later ages, such as is the first one concerning the order of the epistles among the Greeks, who think soundly in all respects and follow the right faith. Also, new words, as when he says that these epistles, which Jerome at once called Catholic, are to be named canonical, and other things of that kind, which it is long to pursue, and which you have at the end of the book refuted by the Benedictine editor, but also long ago by Richard Simon and Father Martin. Anyway, so it's and I believe I have some citations there. Now, before we get to this, I would just say I highlighted on the screen a much later age. Now, this part of it, this is the place where you have to acknowledge the weakness of certain arguments. The much later age, we may have to say, is somewhat relative. Yeah, at the time when they published this, I don't think that they were aware of Codex Fuldensis. And that
And so that's what I'm talking about. So it says this prologue, is not Jerome's, but of a man, both of a much later age. So when he's written this, he doesn't know about Codex Valdensis, which is dated to 150 years after, or 140 years after Jerome. So he's saying, oh, it's a much later age. So obviously, if you think it's in the 800s or whatever, okay, well, that's, you're looking, 400 years later. But so obviously he hasn't got all the information. He hasn't got the same type of information that we have today. He's following, Richard Simon, critical history of the New Testament. So they're dealing with only the fragmentary information. And Migne, I called him Milne for some reason. Migne, it's a different type of name. I guess maybe he's French or something. But he just simply doesn't know. Now, his book was written just before the discovery of Valdensis, and so and TurretinFan does mention this, but to me it's like, well, okay, well, he just got it wrong, and all that he's saying here has to be taken into light that he probably would have retracted all this, a lot of this.
Codex pushed.
So to me, it's like reading like the first edition of Metzger sort of thing. It's like, well, some of the things he retracted later, and when you're doing this type of thing, you got to be careful of anachronism.
Back the date of this prologue beyond earlier than what was originally thought to be the age of this work. There are possibilities, like somehow the work is a clever forgery of a later age inserted into this much earlier work, and it's not impossible, but
it sort of is impossible.
But it's not the best explanation. To my eyes, just looking at the document, it looks like it's part of the document. It looks like it's original to that document, that it wasn't added later. There are some additions to it, some edits of it.
So let's have a look at Jacques Paul Migne. Now, I have to put that into Google Translate and try and get the exact name, because I'm going to be saying his name forever until the cows come home. And so if it says it's French, yes, French detected.
Jacques Paul Migne.
Nimi.
Jacques Paul Migne.
Nimi.
Jacques Paul Migne. Jacques Paul Migne.
Sounds like Nimi.
Jacques Paul Migne.
Migne.
Jacques Paul Migne.
I guess we're saying it in English, so.
Jacques Paul Migne.
Migne. I've got it set to Australian. But the Google Maps was an Aussie girl, and so people are used to that. And so, yeah, he worked on all this. It would be interesting to see if he had retracted some of what he's written about the prologue, because it was written beforehand, before Valdensis was found. But yeah, so I guess that's just another thing, and and I think the thing is too, like with these videos, some of these things that I've read and learned, I've gone through all of Stephen Avery's material on this. I've gone through all the Father's True Monarchy site. I've read Grantley MacDonald's material on this. Looked at Erasmus's annotations. And so sometimes I'm just saying things and it just seems like I'm just making it up or whatever, but it's like oftentimes I have consulted people. So I guess, TurretinFan's looking at a whole bunch of other things, and there will be little snippets of information that eventually sort of get ironed out. And this is one of the reasons why I really didn't want to debate on this like straight away. I'll debate on the comma, but debating on something like this, like these type of things really need to be ironed out first. Because if, like, just say we were to do a debate tomorrow and TurretinFan brought this up, all I have to do is say, well, this is before the dating of Codex Fuldensis happened. So the vast majority of all that's being said here is just simply redundant. It's not relative. So when you got a guy saying that this prologue is not Jerome's, the first thing he's saying, it's a man of a much later age and almost of the lowest bench, like of the lowest authority. And it's like, well, this is just something that's added way later. But then they find a manuscript with this exact prologue in it, only 140 years after Jerome. But then people are like, well, it's 140 years after Jerome. It's a long time sort of thing. It's like, it's not a huge amount of time, So anyway, I'll catch up with the comments. Rebuke and reprove, says Grace and Peace. Saints, Hudson is in the house. Does TurretinFan believe Paul wrote the book of Hebrews? Some people don't think it is compatible with his other writings. They will say it didn't sound like Paul. Yeah, and I've listened to those arguments. I mean, to me, Paul wrote it. I see Paul all the way through that. And so do many other people. Ben Yes Huron says, it is likely there were some redactions, verses displaced as marginal notes or interpolations of the New Testament. Everyone's got their opinion about those sort of things. I guess it's just got to be proven, that type of thing. So let's continue.
Are possibly of a later age, some improvements to it and so forth. Minor stuff. But there might be some of that. But by and large, it seems like it's there. And because it's in Codex Fuldensis, it is of an age that's later than Jerome, yes. But to say much later, it depends what you mean by much later. Maybe a century later, maybe a little bit more than a century later, but not like 2 or 3 centuries later, certainly. So much later, depends what you mean. We just maybe have to be content to say later age. And low authority. The biggest thing, the biggest clue was the fact that it refers to these letters in a way that Jerome, in his authentic works, never refers to them, which is as the canonical letters. Because Jerome is not, Jerome always refers to them as the Catholic letters, and such they are, never the canonical letters. Now, it's true that Jerome is associated with canonical issues, and it's true that he thought these letters were canonical, but
Okay, sorry, I did mute myself because I was having a drink. Okay, sorry about that, guys. So this really comes back to, Jerome. Can he use the word canonical, or does he always have to use the word Catholic or universal? And it seems like this is pointed as one of those, grammatical moments like what we're looking at in the last 12 verses of Mark, where James White will say, well, they used the word form. We saw, Jesus in a different form. So that's Gnosticism, because, he's just appearing like the shack. He can be a black woman 1 minute, and he can be a white guy the next, and he can be a Chinese old man, the next, and he's appearing in a different form, or it's like modalism, this type of thing. And so, these type of words are usually it's something completely out of the context. What does this mean, though? Can Jerome ever just use a word where he turns around and says, hey, look, I want to write a prologue to Ruth or whatever, and the prologue to it, I want to use these particular words. Does he always have to use the same words? And if he does change something, why is that considered strange and weird? When we know there's so many places in the Gospels, like even when it's talking about the exact same story that that Matthew, Mark, and Luke would talk about, at times they use a different word, and one of them will just use a different word. Is that just instantly suspect? Oh, well, they didn't write that. That's just written in later and all the rest of it. Surely Jerome can do whatever he wants. He can use whatever words he wants. And this, to me, is not the way that we should look at it. Now, maybe Migne has the goods to be able to look at the Latin in this way. I mean, he obviously knows his Latin. But the fact that he doesn't have the latest up-to-date manuscripts, he's saying this is from a much later age. Now, if he did know of the manuscript and he's saying it's a much later age, well, obviously there is something wrong with him having a bias against this. But thinking that it's from a much later age, from 800, okay, well, he obviously doesn't have the correct, all the material in front of him that he needs to evaluate this properly. So he would already have a bias against it, and then he's looking at it from that skewed bias.
He didn't refer to them as the canonical letters. Whoever put this together has made some kind of mistake in trying to imitate the style of Jerome by calling them the canonical letters. So
what we're going to see from now on is TurretinFan is basically just saying this is Pseudo-Jerome. He's been called pseudo. So once someone has some sort of stigma against them, and the media know this is why they do what they do. But just say someone is called, a wife basher or a child abuser or whatever, but then they're proven innocent. We've seen this in Australia recently. There was this one guy, and he was a famous footballer, and he got accused of doing something with a girl he shouldn't have done, and he maintained his innocence all the way through. But this girl was saying, no, he was doing this, doing that. But really what came out in the trial, one of her friends said, actually, she's contradicting herself. I'm only trying to help a friend out. I don't really know what happened. And then it came out that, well, this guy wouldn't date the girl. So she turned around and said, well, he raped me, basically. And so he was like 22, and this is only recently. Like, it destroyed his career. He hasn't been able to play football for a year. And this girl just walks off scot-free. Like, it's just incredible. But the whole thing about it really is the stigma that goes along with that. So once someone is branded in a certain way, people in their mind, that it's hard to shake that. There's been all sorts of strange things happening between Sam Shamoon and who's that guy, David Wood, and saying all sorts of stuff. And it's like, oh, man. But I don't know, someone was just saying, like, Sam Shamoon did this and did that. And I have no idea really about it, but I just saw some snippets. But in my mind, I'm like, yeah, that creepy guy, sort of thing. But I think the whole thing is, like we say, someone like Stephen Anderson, it's been pretty well documented that is what happened. And, he's just come out and said it's okay to do that, sort of thing. But with other people, there's just lies, innuendo, and it's hard to shake that. And the reason I'm saying all this is because when it's like it's already been labeled Pseudo-Jerome, most probably because they've only got latter documents with it in it. But then you find earlier documentation, it should be changed from Pseudo-Jerome back to just Jerome, as the way it was during the Reformation period. And so let's continue.
That's one of the clues that this is not written by Jerome, but written at a later age. And the suggestion is perhaps the time of Cassiodorus, when, and because I think someone has said that Cassiodorus has used some similar language regarding calling them canonical books instead of calling them canonical epistles instead of calling them Catholic epistles. In any event, this terminology is from a later time, and therefore what presents itself as though it's a fragment of a letter from Jerome is not what it appears to be.
So it's from a later time. See, TurretinFan is repeating this stuff that's been disproven. So this is not good. It's not a good start, because if it is 546, it's only 140 years after Jerome worked on the Vulgate. Now, I'm going to quickly look up Jerome. Jerome. There we go. Now let's just have a quick look on Wikipedia. So he lived to 420. Okay, so you got to understand that Codex Fuldensis was written, what's that, 126 years after Jerome died. 126 years. And TurretinFan's saying, well, it doesn't suit that era of Latin. Well, that might be an old argument that's made by Migne, but it doesn't fit today. And we shouldn't really be using that argument. And so the Patrologia was the original printing plates for that were destroyed in 1868. So that's the same year as Codex Fuldensis was known to have that particular date and have Jerome's prologue in it. So I wonder if there's ever been like a retraction somewhere else. That would be an interesting thing to look at. How long did Migne live for? Well, he died in 1875, so he would have known about this. It would have been brought up because that's 7 years later. But maybe he was very aged. He was born in 1800, so he would have been 75 years old, which is, it's not that old, but it could be old enough to go, I've been looking at books all my life. I'm putting an end to this. But that would be something that I would question and look into. So, so 126 years after Jerome. And let me just rewind that, and we'll just see what TurretinFan's saying.
So, and therefore, calling them canonical epistles instead of calling them Catholic epistles. In any event, this terminology is from a later time.
It's from a later time. So, 100. How can you tell if it's from a later time? If it's from 100, it's such a small window of time from 420 when Jerome died till 546, and so it's usually 405 when the Vulgate was written. I'll just double check that. Whoops. Vulg. Still not working. There we go. Yeah, 405. So 382 to 405. But yeah, it's inserted apparently inserted this prologue and using words that came later. I mean, how much did Latin change between the death of Jerome and 546?
And therefore, the what presents itself as though it's a fragment of a letter from Jerome is not what it appears to be. So that's one thing.
So we haven't really gotten anything except for it comes from a later age, which is not true. Basically, the grammatical issues of having the word Catholic or universal, and it uses the word canonical, which to me it's not really an issue. Now, maybe what I should do is actually jump on TurretinFan's blog and read through exactly what's said here, because it does seem like TurretinFan is tying himself to this issue. I know later on he is looking at some of the documents and manuscripts and things like that. But TurretinFan, Blogspot. Okay, I don't think it was that long ago. I may as well show you guys what I'm looking at. Here's TurretinFan's blog. Sola Scriptura. Catholics, Trinitarian Bible Society, and Revelation 16:5. And okay, so we're going on to the next page. More Revelation 16:5 stuff. Whitgift and the Apocrypha. I thought it was closer than that. Maybe I've actually skipped past it. I'm sure TurretinFan will be there screaming at the screen saying, stop it. Yeah, maybe I need to just search. Or maybe there's a list of articles on the side here. Oh yeah, here we go. Oh, that's very old. Long time ago. But I can still search for that. Migne. Let's go down. Maybe I'll just type it in Migne. Anyway, I cannot for the life of me find that article, which is weird. Maybe it's under Jerome. Here we go. Finally. Oh, it was in August. I guess we're nearly at Christmas. So here we go. This is what's being read here. Now, it goes for quite a long time, so I'll just read through it. That this prologue is not Jerome's, but of a man both of a much later age and almost of the lowest bench. So it's like it comes from a way later time and of the lowest bench. So more recent critics, even the Marti and Naeus himself, prove with such certain arguments that if we should wish to show this very thing, we might seem to be doing what has already been done. For indeed, the whole context of the speech cries out, badly patched together here and there from scraps of Jerome, the style itself unpolished, where the author adds certain things of his own, the sentences loose and smelling of latter ages, such as is that first one, it's worded so weirdly, concerning the order of the epistles among the Greeks, who think soundly in all respects, follow the right faith, also new words, as when he says that these epistles, which Jerome at once called Catholic, are to be named canonical, and other things of that kind, which it is long to pursue, and which you have at the end of the book refuted by the Benedictine editor, but also long ago by Richard Simon. And so this is the thing. This is coming from Richard Simon, Roman Catholic guy who he didn't like the comma. And so it's basically he has put his trust in what has been said by Richard Simon. And he's saying, okay, it's a later age. That's proven false. Okay, it's the lowest bench. It's bad Latin. It's like okay. He uses a different word than he usually uses. It's like okay. So, but then he says, therefore, there will be someone to whom it would perhaps more have pleased to have rejected it entirely from here, and co-signed this writing among the spurious. But since both the manuscripts generally have it, among which also are ours, soon to be commended, and also all the older editions of the Bible, such as the Nuremberg of the year 1475, the Venetian of the year 1498, the Basel of the year 1506, the Parisian of the year 1563, the two Lyons editions of the years 1520 and 1589, the Antwerp of 1617, it seemed better with the reader forewarned to retain it. So he's saying, okay, it's historically we have used it. Okay, so he's saying it's a forgery, but because we've used it so much, let's keep it in there, but just warn people that it's a fake. Okay. Now, as far as our codices are concerned, none of the three of better note, which have employed in consultation, bear Jerome's name on the title. The first, however, older than the others as far as we have seen from the library once of Nanitola, now of the Holy Cross in Jerusalem at Rome, the second of Verona in the library of the Observant Friars of St. Benedictine. This book, although it contains the whole New Testament, nevertheless does not have the Apocalypse. The third is with us, which we received from some museum in Milan, but also it is often possible to find very many others of this sort in the libraries of Italy, especially in Florence, in St. Mark's, and of the Laurentian, as likewise others, although rarer, which with the audacious falsehood prefix Jerome's name. We will speak in its proper place below concerning others who either omit, or recite with some difference from the common reading that verse in the epistle of St. John concerning the heavenly witnesses. So it is interesting that it really just comes down to, it's got the comma in it. Okay. For the sake of producing which this preface was composed. Okay, for the sake of producing. Okay, so he's saying the whole reason there's a forgery is because of the comma. So listen to this very clearly. That verse in the Epistle of St. John concerning the heavenly witnesses, for the sake of producing which this preface was composed. So, it's a bit like Erasmus having a manuscript made to order to have the comma in. So apparently this was made to order to have the comma in, this type of thing. So, these stories are sort of very similar. These things, meanwhile, will suffice to remove the foulest of all slanders with which Faustus Socinus, the head of the sect of evil names, sought Jerome, so to say, as the true author of this prologue, who, when he had, as he says, perhaps chanced upon some copy or even several copies in which that clause of the triple witness, namely the Father, the Word, and the Holy Spirit, bearing witness in heaven, had been added against the testimony of other copies, both Latin and Greek, began to defend and promote that clause as though genuine, complaining publicly that by the fault and fraud of heretics it had been erased from the common codices. For indeed Jerome wrote these things not at all, nor in his time had that clause fallen out from the Latin or Greek copies, nor at last had that monster of a man burst forth from the cavern of hell, who most often would drag into the culmination of the sacred text the carelessness of scribes meeting him. Let us hear Martianaeus. And so then he's got this scholar, Jean Martianae. Okay, so he is talking about it. Now, I could read through all that, but as you can see, it goes forever. Now, we will go through this information, but I don't think I'm going to do that tonight because I want to get through what TurretinFan's saying. But I just thought I'd read that earlier part, which is basically Migne's information. So basically he's saying it's way too old. That's not true. He's saying there's an anachronistic type of wording there that comes from a later age. He's wrong on that because it comes from 546, which is not that far detached from Jerome. And he's basically saying that he's getting all this information from Richard Simon, who is basically the father of modern day text criticism when you look at it that way. But he's saying, hey, in the around the Reformation period and just before that, you're looking at 50 years before that, it was sort of agreed that it was genuine by pretty much everyone. So that's why we're sort of looking at it. But he just keeps saying it's a fake, it's a phony, and it's really that prologue was only put in so that they could put this this horrible verse that we all know is fake into the Bible. So that's pretty much like if TurretinFan has listened to me so far, if he has something, if he thinks I'm being a bit too loose with what I'm saying there, but as far as I can tell, that's pretty much what he is saying, whether you agree with it or not. So let's continue.
Also, if you dig into this, there's some other issues. One of them was Martinet's comments. He talks about it. Let's see. He talks about quad quia, I believe. He says that there's some barbarous Latin in the editions. I don't see it right at this moment. See. He's been looking at them. Oh.
Okay, so it does look like I've found that quad quia, where he says, I will confidently say that there is nothing in the whole compass of words which savors of Jerome's phrasing and style. And where will you find in Jerome that phrase of the lowest Latinity, quad quia, because that so great a barbarism is utterly abhorrent to Jerome's eloquence, and he himself abhors the many faults of speech which occur frequently in the content of that prologue. So he's saying, okay, because he used quad quia, that is proof, because Jerome would never do that, sort of thing. So then we're basically going back to just looking at some of the words and saying, well, Jerome would never say that. Other times it's like, well, he would never use the word canonical. he would always use the word Catholic. I mean, once he's done it in a certain amount of books, everything and I hear this sort of stuff like from Bart Ehrman. He would talk about, Peter definitely didn't write, especially Second Peter, because he was an illiterate fisherman. There's these presuppositions first, and then it just leads on to, well, he didn't write it. How would he know about Greek philosophy and all this sort of stuff? And then it's just written off. And a lot of books of the New Testament are written off by Bart Ehrman in this way. And he will also use this type of content, saying the style is different, and so we can just throw that one out as well. And I just don't see, to me, this is not really convincing. But I guess later on we will go through this material because it is related. But anyway, we will continue with TurretinFan.
Oh, he notes one of the things that they said is that there's neither Jerome's name nor the name of anyone else at the prologue in the older manuscripts. And that's fine. But of course, there's certain things that are included, like references to people that Jerome frequently wrote to, that are intended to make it sound like it's from Jerome. Let's see. So let's see if I can point out some more arguments that he has here. So let's see. He said this is absent in some of the manuscripts. This prologue is absent in some of them, but that argument by itself is not enough. And I agree with him about that. Let's see. He says that there's also many of these prologues, and they always begin, here begins the prologue to such and such. But anyway, he talks about the fact that the oldest manuscripts don't have it, and he says that he says that the little preface affixed in the copies of Charles the Bald.
So the oldest manuscripts don't have it, but the second oldest manuscript to attest the Vulgate has it. So how much older do you want? Anyway, but obviously this is dealing with old information, with people who aren't dealing with the issues of Fuldensis.
The beginning of Acts of the Apostles was not written for this purpose by Jerome. It was taken from the Helmuted prologue, which is true. The point being that Jerome didn't necessarily create prologues for all the New Testament books. And let's see, Jerome has these fine words concerning the epistles. James, Peter, John, and Jude have published 7 epistles, as mystical as they are brief and succinct, and likewise long, brief in words, long in meanings, so that he is rare who does not stumble in reading them. So nothing of this content in the letter that's found in the letter to Paulinus is found in this letter, or supposed letter. He points out that point I mentioned earlier, that the canonical epistles term was unknown to Jerome. It comes later. He always calls them Catholic, not canonical.
So notice it comes later, after Jerome. So 126 years later, the language has changed. This comes later. No, that they thought it was 800. They're looking into it, mistakenly thinking that it's 400 years later someone's added this type of thing. So that they are not up to date. They are not up to speed with the manuscript evidence, really.
So that's like the big giveaway from his standpoint.
So the big giveaway is that they don't have the latest manuscript evidence on it, which disproves what they're saying.
He does say that the Synod of Laodicea called them canonical, but Jerome never uses that term for it.
Okay, so some people did use, what was it with the Synod of, I'll just rewind that.
Laodicea called them canonical.
The Synod of Laodicea. What year was that? And that was before Jerome. Synod of Laodicea, 363 to 364. And they talked a lot about canons. Okay.
Canonical, but Jerome never uses that term for it.
So just one word. If he uses a different word, that's just a fake, you know.
And
look, I'm not saying that you don't do this type of thing to prove a fake, but that shouldn't be your only thing. And also, you know, I think even TurretinFan using this information that comes earlier than the publication of Codex Valdensis and the dating and everything, these guys have a presupposition that it's old, it's added later, and so that they aren't coming from a correct standpoint.
Let's see. Then he says, who did that false Jerome get the claim that the order among the Greeks? So one thing we should say is that there's more to this prologue than the comment about the Johannine comma. Before he gets to that, he talks about the order of these epistles in the Greeks. And he says that for that, the author of this prologue says that for the Greeks, the two epistles of Peter come first before the epistle of James. So in the Latin order, as in English, it's Hebrews, James, 1st and 2nd Peter, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, Jude. But the author of this prologue says that with the Greeks, they put the epistles of Peter first because of the primacy of Peter, essentially. And and he says this is done. The author says this is done among the most faithful Greeks. But then he says, but look at all the faithful Greeks. Athanasius, Gregory the theologian, John Damascene, and they all use the same order we do. What are you talking about? Where did this come? Who came up with this idea? And why would Jerome, if it was really Jerome, think that? Would he really think that Athanasius isn't one of the most faithful Greeks? Of course he would. So it's nonsense. So he seriously doubts that this question, because he makes this weird claim about the order of the copies and the claim that this is true of the most theologically orthodox Greeks, that this can't be Jerome because he would never make a blunder that bad. And
okay, so I guess two things with that. I'll have to go back over that type of argument where we're looking at this type of change. I mean, see, the thing is, what are there manuscripts that have been found since? Because you got to understand that, you know, they didn't have the 5,000 manuscripts that we have today, or the 509 manuscripts, you know, that they could have just had like handfuls. You know, I understand TurretinFan saying, okay, well, you know, when you read what the early church writers are saying, they have a certain way of writing down, you know, this is the order. But we've got to check all that, because this is an old document. This is like around 1850 or whatever. And so what else has come to light after this? Because like if we were reading this today, this is the latest findings. It's like, oh, okay, well, you know, unless someone's got a huge barrier to push, it's like most people would just state the facts. But that this could just have be based upon fragmentary information and not all the details. So that's the first thing I would look at, and then I would search for anyone who puts it in that type of order and look at it that way. So And also the thing is too, like during the Reformation period, what were people saying about this type of thing? Because, you know, someone like Erasmus, I don't think these things escaped the scrutiny of someone like Erasmus or Lorenzo Valla, or were those guys talking about the prologue not being genuine because of these reasons, you know? So
it says, we also know that this order of the canonical epistles, which the false Jerome valued so highly, was neglected by the true Jerome in his edition, if Cassiodorus is to be believed. So Cassiodorus is the one who says that Jerome follows the same. After these follow the epistles of the apostles of Peter 2, Paul 14, John 1, Jude 1, and the books of the Acts of the Apostles by Luke. So Cassiodorus has them in that order, first with Peter, but not the Greeks. So anyway, same thing. He goes on to argue this point at greater length. The bottom line being, though, that it's definitely not correct that this is the Greek order and that Jerome was somehow supporting that Greek order over the Latin order. And in fact, oddly enough, in these copies that have this prologue, they next turn always to James. So it's just a strange thing. Let's see. He points out that he says, I will confidently say there's nothing in the whole compass of words which savors of Jerome's phrasing and style. And where will you find in Jerome that phrase of the lowest Latinity, quod quia? Now, this point, I mean, I agree with him that this is not great Latin, but, and here's another place where you have to kind of acknowledge one of the weaknesses. An otherwise bulletproof argument is that the oldest copies don't have, of the prologue, don't have this barbarism. But it's still not a beautifully written thing. That's just like the most glaring thing, but this most glaring thing isn't in all the copies. It's just a barbarism that's crept into the manuscript tradition, evidently.
And so I mentioned that also earlier. But that would be an interesting thing to see differences. Now, I know that we did compare the difference between Codex Valdensis and the Lacaba Bible. And see, the Lacaba has the prologue, but also has 1 John 5:7 in the main text. But it is later. But it also has written in it, it talks about Arius. Let Arius read this, a footnote. And it is written in a sense where if that note has been copied from earlier editions, it is written in a sense where it's almost like expecting Arius to be alive and to read that, you know. But I guess that can go either way. It could be, well, Arius has died 200 years ago, and so you know, let him read that. Like I could put that, you know, if I was to say come against the Calvinistic verse, I'll let John Calvin read this, then, you know, but he's been passed away for quite a long time. I'm only just using that as an example.
He says the apostrophes to Paula and Eustochium, there's references to Paula and Eustochium, who are frequent correspondents of Jerome, and they're mentioned presumably in order to invoke the idea that Jerome's behind this, as well as the translational comments, even if the name Jerome isn't placed on it, to make it sound like it's coming from Jerome. And so the name Jerome is found on some, and he goes on, he says, the occasion of the prologue falsely ascribed to Jerome seems to have been composed for us. We point out that the verse is lacking in many very ancient manuscript copies, and many of the same age is supplied in the margins of books, and in more recent ones it's always present, yet not in the same order, because they're most often verse 8, that is, the things which are read at verse 8 in the Latin Vulgate precedes verse 7, according to the following arrangement. And he gives the arrangement, and he says, in the same manner, the testimony of the Trinity is supplied in many older manuscript copies, in which it was omitted by the first hand of the copyists. Matter indeed is so in all the manuscript copies, both old and recent, but But don't worry, these things happen by mistake. He's saying this thing about don't worry about it because these things happen by mistake, because Rome had decided this is this is despite what the evidence has. So he's kind of.
I think it was in 1910 that Rome no longer believed the comment was genuine.
Try to argue that, well, it could be original. Things get dropped occasionally. But let's jump down to trying to translate. And again, this is not necessarily the best possible translation, but this is a translation of the text as it appears in Minya, as I've tried to translate it from there. And here's what it says. The order is not the same among the Greeks, who think soundly and follow the right faith, of the 7 epistles which are called canonical, as is found in the Latin codices. Remember, this is what we were talking about before. I'm going to pause for a second just to smooth my voice out here. So he says, the order is not the same. Let me make this easier for me to read. Here we go. Not the same among the Greeks, who think soundly and follow the right faith of those. So we already said this. The fact that he's calling them canonical is already a giveaway that this is not Jerome. The second giveaway.
So he uses a different word. It's not Jerome.
Jerome would have known that the Greek order is the same as Jerome's order.
And so that's something that, like I said, this is written in 1850. What other information has been brought to light since then?
And then he does this thing about Peter being first. His epistles should also be first. Not just first among the Catholic epistles, but first among all the epistles, like Cassiodorus has them before the Paul's epistles. So Peter's epistle.
So, I mean, someone like Cassiodorus, where did he get his idea to do that? Maybe he got it from the Greeks. Maybe that has been rediscovered. But that would have to be something that is looked into, rather than just trusting what these guys had before the rise of the multitude of majority text manuscripts, Byzantine manuscripts that came to light, and also the papyri. And James White would just say, if you're going with a story that's before the papyri, throw it out. And even Dean Burgon, if you're reading his stuff, it's before the papyri, throw it out, sort of thing. And so I'm just sort of going, well, okay, well, we already know that this is anachronistic because they don't know of the date of Fuldensis here by what I can see. But also, this whole other issue, was that something that was debunked not long after this, or maybe in the next 30, 40 years, people started to find these manuscripts and say, hang on, we do have another preface here that has this type of order, or we do find a Greek manuscript with this type of order. And so all this early church writer spoke of this, and here's exactly what he said. But that's where I would go with this. But I don't want to do that study right now because we're live, and it would just take up the rest of my time.
So then Paul's, then James, John, and Jude. But he says the first one of them is James. But he says, just as it long since corrected the evangelists according to the line of truth, so we've restored these, God helping us to their own order. For indeed, the first one is James, 2 of Peter, 3 of John, and 1 of Jude, which, as named by them, so also the translators had been faithfully rendered into the Latin utterance. Neither would they make readers, nor would the variety of words clash against itself. Now, before we get to this clash against itself, which is a strange claim, we have to ask ourselves what's going to be clashing against itself. But let's go on and read. He says, especially in that place where concerning the unity of the Trinity, we read it set forth in the first epistle of John, in which also we have found that by unfaithful translators, much has been strayed from the truth of the faith, placing in their edition only the words of 3, that is, of the water, of the blood, and the Spirit, and omitting the testimony of the Father and of the Word and of the Spirit, in which chiefly both the Catholic faith is strengthened and the one substance of the divinity of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit is proved. But in the other epistles, how far our edition differs from that of others, I leave to the prudence of the reader, But you, Virgin of Christ, Eustochium, while you inquire from me more earnestly the truth of Scripture, you expose my old age in a certain way to be gnawed by the teeth of the envious, who proclaim me to be a falsifier and corrupter of the Holy Scriptures. But I, in such a work, neither fear the envy of my rivals, nor will I deny to those asking the truth of Holy Scripture. And you can tell this last bit is sort of this invoking Eustochium, as though this is somehow a letter to her, that this is somehow supposed to suggest to people that it's written by Jerome. And it's supposedly written in his old age, so later in life, and that he's supposedly defending himself from accusations of corrupting the Scriptures. Although, who's actually behind corrupting the Scriptures? It's an interesting question. But notice this part, the way that it's written here, where it says omitting the testimony of the Father, etc., makes it sound like Jerome is saying you should include the Johannine comma, because if you omitted it, you're omitting something that strengthens the Catholic faith and proves the one substance of the divinity of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Now, there's a couple of problems with this argument. The biggest problem is that as it's written, this just says that there's three that are one in testimony, not in substance, in testimony. It doesn't. It just says. I mean, it literally just says these three are one, but it doesn't say one in substance. It says there's three that bear witness: the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and these three are one. In context, it's one in what? It's one in testimony, not in the substance of their divinity. Now, maybe someone would take it out of context to suggest that, but that's not the central meaning of it. Now,
so it seems that when Cyprian quotes the issue and he says, and these three are one, then it's often said, where is the Father, the Word, and the Spirit? Where it clearly says the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, and it says, as it says of them, and these three are one. So it's not going to say verbatim, but it is so close. When you put them together and it says, and again it is written, and if you just get that whole section of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and these three are one, and you get 1 John 5:7 and put it underneath it, the only real difference is like Word and Son. But he clearly says written of them. And so he's relating that back to, Matthew as well, Matthew 28. And so, but, Cyprian, the bit that is absolutely verbatim, or it does have Father and Holy Spirit there, which is verbatim, but he has, and these three are one, and that's usually what gets discussed. Where here it doesn't have that, it just has the Father and of the Word and of the Spirit, and it doesn't say these three are one, so it doesn't quote the whole thing, and so therefore it's like he doesn't even quote the whole thing. It's like, okay, so you have to, all these early church writers, because this type of standard doesn't, like if there was a verse that say me and TurretinFan and Wes Huff and a whole bunch of other guys got together and we were to combat some of the strange things that Bart Ehrman was saying or that Muslims were saying or whatever against the Scriptures, we wouldn't use this type of strictness. If we saw an allusion to a certain verse, we'd say, yeah, well, they're obviously alluding to the verse. Obviously, it's alluding to the Father and the Word and the Spirit. It's obviously alluding to that, and so anyway, I'll keep pressing through, but I just sort of thought that was a bit weird because usually the whole thing about these three are one with Cyprian, that's the big deal, and it's like, well, where's the rest of it? Why doesn't it say the rest of it? Well, here it says the Father, the Word, and the Spirit. And it's like, where's the three being one? And it's like, we'll just never please people, I guess.
It could be that you would say, well, there are three that bear witness is talking about the testimony, but these three are one is talking about their unity of substance, that they're of one substance. And probably there have been Christians who have believed that that's what it meant, who have read this and thought it was scripture and believed that that's what it meant.
Pretty much everyone in the Reformation period.
But, of course, the question is, what about the three words, water, blood, and spirit? And is that the entirety of the difference between the shorter reading and the longer reading? And
so instead of just, getting the gist, it's sort of like saying, well, some Bibles have God was manifest in the flesh. Other Bibles have who appeared in a body. And TurretinFan's like, well, it doesn't say great is the mystery of godliness. God was manifest in the flesh, and quote the whole verse. It's like, well, obviously you get it, you don't have to elaborate like that, like nowhere else. So this is what I found with some of our dialogue on Revelation 16:5, that these unrealistic type of parameters were put there. It's like, oh no, that's not a quote of Revelation 16:5 because they should just quote the whole thing in one big go. And it's like, well, I had to keep saying, I'm talking about the future form, the Somenos, the shall be. That's what I'm focusing on. And oftentimes it's like, oh, but it's got holy there afterwards. And it's like, yeah, but I'm not talking about that. And I can talk about it, but specifically in my book, I was talking about a Somenos. And so I can't go back and just delete those pages if you're reading it. But that wasn't my main focus. And so it's sort of like here, you've got, like, let me just read it and just see if you get this, okay? So it says, in which we have found by unfaithful translators, much has been strayed from the truth of the faith, placing in their edition only the words of three, that is, the water, of the blood, and of the Spirit, and omitting the testimony of the Father and of the Word and of the Spirit, in which chiefly both the Catholic faith is strengthened and the one substance of divinity of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit is proved. Like, do you get that? I get it straight away. I think anyone would get that. Now, if you think the Communionium shouldn't be there, it's like, I don't know, some weird insertion, it's like apocryphal or it's Gnostic or whatever you're thinking. It's just it's a marginal gloss that unfortunately ended up, being something that we talk about a lot. You're like, well, they didn't quote the whole thing. But it says the testimony of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, contrasting that with it's saying they only put three in, the water, the blood, and the Spirit. There should be these other three, the Father, Word, and the Spirit. What more do you want? You know what I mean? And this is where I just see that it's unrealistic to have it, like, to desire more and go, well, they didn't put more, so it's not genuine. Now, one thing that he brought up was the whole issue of unfaithful scribes, and he sort of said it in a way which was like, I guess I keep bringing up unfaithful scribes. Now, here we have if the prologue is not by Jerome, whoever wrote it still makes the assertion that the comma was originally present but was removed by unfaithful and heretical scribes. So I'm not the first one to say that type of thing. Where was that? Okay, Fuldensis. Okay, so it does say unfaithful translators, but it has been mentioned like unfaithful scribes. So, I mean, to me, I've just sort of been using them synonymously, because I guess a scribe could be also a translator. I just sort of bring that up, like this. I don't even know much about this page at all, but it's just a prologue to the canonical epistles of Jerome, evidence for 1 John 5:7. I've just looked it up, and it's got they're saying they're scribes as well. So it has just become a common thing. So if I'm using scribes, it's not really just something that I've made up. Okay, that's by Thomas Ross, and that's in 2014. So it is quite a common thing to say scribes. Okay, so that's interesting. I'll have to keep that page open.
The short answer is no, it's not. In the longer reading, generally, there's also inserted that these three bear witness in earth, the water, spirit, and blood bear witness in earth, while the Father, Word, and Spirit bear witness in heaven. And sometimes there's some additional additions as well beyond that. But I'll just leave it there for the moment. But there's the biggest problem is has been misquoted by a number of times as saying unfaithful scribes instead of saying unfaithful translators. So the claim, because remember, this is being put into the mouth of Jerome, the claim is that that Jerome is saying that anyone else who's translated this and has left out the witness of the Father, the Word, and the Spirit, that their unfaithful translation has somehow weakened the Catholic faith. That's the argument that's put into Jerome's mouth here, that some other translators have done this. But there's a problem, which is after this prologue, in the oldest manuscript, in the older manuscripts, almost all of the older manuscripts that have this prologue, almost all of those have 1 John 5 without this bonus testimony of the Father, the Word, and the Spirit. That's not in those texts. So the prologue says this, whatever it says, but then when it comes to the text, this testimony isn't there in the text. At least it's not in the main text. In a number of cases, it's been added in the margin by some later hand. Someone has tried to insert it into the text. But the original copy didn't have it. So it's very strange if you're copying Jerome's prologue and then copying an unfaithful translation by some other unfaithful translator. Why in the world would you do that? Doesn't make a lot of sense.
Okay, so when we were looking at Fuldensis before, it did seem like it had a bit of a blurb about people who were copying certain sections of that. Now, I'm going to try and find it. Okay, so I have so many things open in the background. I just found a page that I need to shut everything down. Okay, yes. Sorry about that. Okay, so Jerome, Council of Laodicea. I'm looking for Fuldensis. Found it. Here we go. So it says here, Victor of Capua, he died in 554, reports that he found an old Latin harmony of the Gospels, which he recognized as following Tatian's arrangement of the Diatessaron. He substituted the Vulgate text for the Old Latin, appending the rest of the New Testament books from the Standard Vulgate. So that is Metzger in the text of the New Testament transmission, corruption, and restoration. So that would be an interesting thing to look into. Victor of Capua. And that's Codex Fuldensis. Victor's best work is Codex Fuldensis, which was written between 541 and 546, while he was bishop at Capua. The Codex is an early manuscript of the Vulgate. It contains the entirety of the New Testament, as well as the apocryphal epistle to the Laodiceans. That's interesting. It's got the epistle to the Laodiceans, and what was that other thing? The Council of Laodicea or something like that was mentioned that had the word canonical in it, which would be an interesting thing to look into, but maybe they're not related. In a style imitative of Tatian's Diatessaron, Other works include several commentaries on the Old and New Testament, as well as a work on the Paschal cycle, which was praised and quoted in fragments by Bede. Victor also authored analyses of the genealogy of Jesus, Noah's Ark, all of which were lost. He dedicated, Codex Valdensis goes back to him. I wonder what page this is. That's interesting, this big marginal note here. Anyway, of interest. Maybe it says that. Nope. But definitely it's an early manuscript of the Vulgate, but clearly it was saying on the Valdensis page here, he substituted the Vulgate text for the Old Latin, appending the rest of the New Testament books from the standard Vulgate. So yeah, that would have to be something that's looked into. But I guess there would be information about that somewhere. So anyway, I don't want to spend too much time on that. Let's just continue.
But there is an issue about this, and that is that this word omitting is not in the oldest manuscripts. And the oldest manuscripts, now I'm reluctant to go here because I don't know the theology of the person who's behind this website. But the part that I'm referring to doesn't deal with that person's theology. So hopefully you'll get the benefit of the blog post without getting into the theology of the author.
And so
I actually don't know. Maybe his,
as I mentioned earlier, this guy's a Jehovah's Witness, but he has a lot of interesting material. He does, and when I say interesting, as you'll see, so I've got it here, The Father's True Monarchy. Now, one thing that I've noticed with this guy, I've searched through his entire website, which if you search for something in a particular way in Google, it will show you every word that appears. Like if you're searching for a certain keyword, it'll have like 100 pages if this is that big, and it'll show you everywhere that word appears. And so I looked specifically for Father Word, or I was actually looking for Logos, and it only appeared like 3 times. And I was like, man, you're talking about the comma Johannine here. Like, he doesn't even like to mention the comma, you know what I mean? And so, I mean, this guy's obviously got a bias, but once you see the material, you can understand why, people like me and TurretinFan both do go there, because it's got, a picture like this of Codex Valdensis, and then a close-up. Excuse me. It's nearly midnight. It's 2 minutes to midnight. I think wasn't there an Iron Maiden song? My old non-Christian life shining through there. But yeah, we can see here where this is the section with the comma Johannine in it. It's had a bit of a spill. I guess someone spilled their coffee. But so this is the section of the prologue. It's written out here, Ernest Frank's Latin translation. So you can see what I mean. It's like, because it is pictorial, you can overlook the fact that the guy, it wouldn't matter whether he was a Muslim or an atheist. And half the time too, like if this was on a Bart Ehrman blog, you'd go, oh, well, look, there you go. It doesn't really matter. So the whole thing of TurretinFan being a bit worried about that, I can understand that. But it's more so the issue of omission down the bottom here. So I was alerted to this back in, I guess, 2020 when I first studied through this, and we have like testimonium omitentes, which is the common way of writing this type of thing. But when you look closely, it has commentes, tentes. And so you can see that there is a pointer here and it has a C there, okay? And so he's pointing out certain aspects of this. And when you go through some of these manuscripts, you can clearly see that they have been edited. The C and the M are obviously omitted there in these two places. The C is omitted there, so it doesn't say commententer. It seems a little bit different Latin, but it does have a C there and a line, it looks like, above the O. And so he's zooming in nice and close for us. And it's got two dots here to show that there is some sort of marginal issue. Sorry, not a marginal issue, variant issue. Sorry, I am getting a little bit tired. It is midnight here. So here it has testimonium. Usually if it's got a line above it, that just means it's got an M on the end. Testimonium omitentes, but it does have this type of thing here. But that could also be pointing to the fact that it's got like the comma there. So people are like, oh, that's important, and they've scribbled something next to it. Okay, so he's showing where this C is being deleted, and we can all see that. Okay, so this is like a 9th century manuscript, and you know, we can go through a lot of these, and they are omitted. Some of them still contain it. They haven't been deleted, but like clearly here, there's space for that. It looks like it has been erased there. It says omitted there. I won't go through every one of these examples, but you can see that it's like that's an interesting thing. Okay, it's got this footnote or a marginal note. That's actually interesting. I haven't thought about that one. It has the omit thing there. That's 9th century. This has the commit. So I guess where we see this type of thing, or it just came to my mind, when you hear pastors say, well, there's sins of omission and there's sins of commission. You know, people would say that, you know, type of thing. So, yeah, he's got lots and lots of examples of all this. So I could tell TurretinFan, I'm pretty sure maybe it was in his earlier blog, he points this out. And when I first initially saw it, I was like, okay, yep, that's the Father's True Monarchy website. And he does make an interesting point. Like he brings up these issues of the C and sometimes the M being omitted as well. One thing, I guess when I was first studying this back in 2020 and going through this material, it does seem like he has added material since then. I can't remember there being this much. I remember there being like maybe 5 or 6 examples, but it seems like he's made this his pet project and he's gone through and shown lots of information, which is good because it's all just there for us to look at and think about. But one thing that sort of showed me that it wasn't really consequential was the comments of Grantley McDonald at the bottom of the page. So he must have commented before 2020. So you got Weed Hacker here. So I'm pretty sure that that's the Jehovah's Witness guy who runs the page. But Grantley McDonald. Okay, so yeah, 2020. So I found this interesting. because now I understand Grantley MacDonald is an atheist. Okay, Grantley MacDonald thinks Christianity is as dangerous as radical Islam. He says that in The Raising the Ghost of Arius. He thinks that King James people who follow the comma are like the most radical. we're the jihadis of the Christian world, sort of thing. And we're dangerous. We're very dangerous because, you know, one minute we're saying you shouldn't get an abortion, and next thing we're mocking those who want same-sex marriage, and we're radicals. We're psychopaths, you know. And he says that in The Raising the Ghost of Arius. If you've never read it, you should read it. But beside that, I give benefit, or I give credit where credit's due. Grantley MacDonald is really good on the Latin language, and he majored in Latin. And he was born the same year that I was born. We were born in the same town in Melbourne, in Victoria. And so I guess in a way I can sort of think of Grantley MacDonald as sort of like a peer, you know, in a sense where he's gone the academic route, and he is an expert in choir style music of the church, which is very interesting. But his Latin is very good. So someone with that type of expertise in Latin, who knows Latin, and I trust what he writes in Latin in his books. When I read through this, he seems to downplay this issue. So he says, you're interesting, and this is what caused me to just sort of go, well, it's sort of like a bit of a nothing burger, okay, because Grantley MacDonald sort of stepped in and said, well, he should naturally go with the type of thing that TurretinFan is going with. Because I was going there, I'm like, oh, this is interesting. It looks like there's some sort of textual issue here with the prologue. But then when I read this, I was like, you know, it doesn't seem like it's that big a deal. So it says, your interesting observation raises many questions about the practices of the editors of this text in the past. And I'm sure that when I first read this in 2020, that there weren't that many examples. There was probably like 10. It looked like there was like a good 30 examples. It was lots and lots. That they should have missed this reading in so many manuscripts staggers belief. However, I doubt commitentes is the correct reading. The author, incidentally, I don't believe it was Jerome, claims that some scribes or translators write down ponentes, the water, the spirit, the blood, but miss out the Father, the Word, and the Spirit. The only sense I can rest from commitentes is that some scribes or translators commit to writing the testimony of the Father, the Word, and the Spirit. Commitentes would thus mean the same thing as ponentes. But then, of course, the author's pointed contrast disappears. He is unhappy that some authors leave out the Father, the Word, and the Spirit, not that they also commit these words to the page, arguing simply that the sense of the passage, I think, omnitentes must be the correct reading. And so Grantley has no real bias. Like I could get said, oh, I'm a King James only guy. I'm desperate. You know, James White's voice comes over and it's like, he's desperate. Just think of, Jeff Riddle. Just think of Ruckman. Just think of Anderson, but no one would say that of Grantley MacDonald. He's writing against the comma. If this went in his favor, he would run with this. So this is why when I read through this, I was like, actually, Grantley MacDonald himself is not really going with this either. And I think TurretinFan sort of omitted this at the end, like in a sense where it's like, well, it could be either way, but sort of thing. There are several possible ways in which the O could have been read as com. Once this had happened in one manuscript copy, it was likely transferred to further copies unless later scribes intervened. It would have been interesting to trace the variants in the entire text of the prologue in the various manuscripts to see if this variant could be isolated to a particular textual family, Of course, such an error could have happened independently more than once, but that's probably doubtful. Firstly, the C might have crept through the visual similarity with the O, but this still leaves some details unexplained. Alternatively, it is possible that Fuldensis, or its archetype, was copied from a defective exemplar in which the word was illegible or damaged. A real possibility if the archetype was written on papyrus, but I don't think it would be written in papyrus. Oh, then again, there are like papyri from like the 700s. The scribe of Fuldensis might then simply have guessed at the missing letter or letters. A third possibility is perhaps the most plausible. It is possible that an early scribe mistook the O for an abbreviation. The Tironian sign for con or com, preserved as an abbreviation in many different kinds of Latin hands through the Middle Ages, looks like a reversed C, which is easily confused with an O. See Aldrich Friedrich Kopp, and he's got the I won't even say that. This would explain the misreading quite economically. Then you have shown in some of the manuscripts some later readers corrected comitentes to omitentes because they clearly realized that comitentes just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I'm glad that you brought this to our collective attention. Even if we seem to be dealing with a rogue reading, you are quite right to ask what the absence of this variant from any critical text edition about the editorial standards in the past. I think I skipped something there, but I think you get the gist. It is possible that the judgment of the editors of yesteryear was compromised of short library opening hours, poor lighting, and failing eyesight. Those filthy splotches in Fuldensis are caused by a reagent used in the 19th century and early 20th century to bring out faded letters, which shows that an earlier editor was really struggling to read the page. However, this oversight might have happened. I hope your discoveries encourage us to do better in the future, Brantley and McDowell. So when I read through that, I was like, man, this guy, he's an expert in the Latin language, even though I disagree with him on Christian issues or on the textual issues, or specifically 1 John 5:7. He would be the type of guy who would jump at this type of information. And like when I first saw it, I was like, man, I want to write a book on that, because it's like someone had done all the homework there and zoomed in on everything. And I guess, Turretin doing this video, I know the feeling of looking at this and going, wow, this is really quite fascinating and interesting. But it does seem to be a bit of a nothing burger. But one good thing that is on the Father's Monarchy website here is he has links to all these manuscripts, which are of the prologue. So if we are going to, look at the prologue and think about it and debate it and all the rest of it, this is a great resource to go through and just check it. Like even just the fact that he's got pictures, far away pictures, and then he's zooming right in on these type of issues. I mean, that's invaluable in itself. And so, it's a very interesting thing. But I think at the end of the day, it's interesting that he's pointed that out. But I would personally agree with Brantley McDonald. Also, the fact that he has a barrow to push, but that should have been something that he put in his book and said, hey, look, we've also got this other evidence, but he doesn't go there. And so I think that speaks volumes. It's a bit like you've found a smoking gun sort of thing, and it's like, well, actually, no, that's not real evidence. And and he wants to push anti-comma evidence, So let's get back to TurretinFan.
he's perfectly orthodox, and I just couldn't find anything. And there were a few comments that were saying, "Oh, I don't support the theology of so and so," which made me wonder what's going on there. So just that grain of salt has been brought up, and we'll move on. So he has started to look at this. He looked at Codex Fuldensis, which is in the 6th century, the 500s. So over a century later than Jerome, but quite early. And it's one of the most significant Vulgate manuscripts. One of the earliest extant Vulgate manuscripts. And he has a lot of images here. Some of them will be easier to see than others. But you can see here is this the prologue is written, and you can see it's written in this mostly continuous script. And so one word blends into the next word, although there's some punctuation in certain places, and there's some kind of capital letters which seem to break it up. But if you look very closely, you can see that there's little, like you can see the Ieus here has been added in by a later hand, and ut here has been added in by a later hand. Maybe by not, I don't know if they're always later hand, but they appear to be, to me, later hands. These may be good corrections, by the way, that are needed for the text. But what's particularly interesting is, and you can kind of see the quality of the text as you scroll through it. It's not the easiest to read. But he's produced it all there, and he's even noted that there's a study, a printed version of this, and you can see within that printed study, and it's much easier to read here, but you can see that he has, in the text, you can see this, what I mentioned about omits. You can see it says omitentes here, testimonium omitentes. And what he doesn't show you, unfortunately, is that there's a footnote to this line, and the footnote to that line says commitentes. And so, let's see, I don't know if he has a link that we can easily get there. Oh, there's an archive. Let's see if I can easily get to this page. Huh. I need to find the specific. This might take a while to find the right page in order to. No, it won't take that long. 1 second, and I'll be there. Let's see, share this tab instead. That's 1 second. So let me just get the correct page on the screen for you. And here we go. We'll share this instead. So in this version, you can see there's just the main text, and there's no in this version there's no footnotes. But this isn't the only version of this study, and there's another there is another version of the study that has footnotes to correct all these points. So perhaps let's not stick to there at the moment. We can come back to the document itself. Let's see if we can where he has it expanded down a little bit later. You can see how he's highlighted testimonium omitentes, omitentes, omitentes. But if you see here, when you where he's created a square, it says not omitentes, which would be like OMITTENTS, but it has COMM. So this is a completely different word. It's not omitentes, it's mitentes. And it has an opposite meaning, or it can have an opposite meaning. And you can see he's like made it easier to read here. He highlights this. There is at least one of the this is like a punctuation mark, just saying that it's the end of the sentence. I don't know. Yes. Does the end quote begin a new sentence? Yes, it does. Anyway, so he gets into this a little bit, and then he goes on, and he's kind of questioning this, and he starts digging in, and you can see he starts going into the other manuscripts of this prologue, and look at this one. Someone had the original document, which is from the 8th or 9th century. The original document clearly had comitentes, but someone has scrubbed the manuscript, and you can see the eraser marks where the C has been scrubbed out, and the first M has been scrubbed out to convert comitentes into omitentes, to try to make it say not. Now keep in mind that comitentes means joined, as opposed to omitentes, which means left out, omitted. So we'll come back to that point in just a minute, but you can see not just that manuscript. Here's another manuscript, and look at this once again. There was a C here, and clearly someone has scrubbed it out. You can see that someone has deliberately altered the text. Now this one is more understandable because there's no second M, but there was. Notice this O had a mark over it, which has also been scrubbed out. The mark over the O means O-N. Comitentes is just a variant spelling of comitentes. This one you can see, by this point, someone has omitentes, and this is early on, still 8th or 9th century. This one, the person does have omitentes, and it seems to be originally written this way. So you can see there's already some change in the text at that early stage, but there's plenty of these other ones, testimonium omitentes, but in the column, there's evidence that someone has washed out the C-O-M and then rewritten the O closer to the second M to make it omitentes. Although it's not a guaranteed result here. Same thing, this one in the 9th century, clearly the C and the mark over the O to show that there's another letter, those have both been clearly erased. Deliberately tampered with. In this one, it hasn't been tampered with. It's still clearly there with the second M as well. And we go on. This is not like a 2 or 3 documents. This is many documents. Here you can see the spacing between the letters is wrong, and you can actually see the tail of the C hasn't been erased, although the rest of the C has been. On this one, you can, this one I think there's no reason to think this one has been altered like the other one. This one, the C has clearly been erased, and the mark over the O has been erased as well. He doesn't highlight it, but it should be there. You can see people commenting in the margin of these documents. This one, you can see is 9th century. It has omitentes. This one has co-mitentes, and with the mark over the O to show that there's an N, con-mitentes, not just co. And you can see that it's not necessarily the only places that are edited in this. Just if you look at the larger piece, you can see there's some kind of erasure going on up here as well. But when it comes to this particular word, you can see that seems to have been some kind of change around this as well, where a C had been placed above the line, and then it is subsequently erased. And Michel Chery, KJV 411.5 says, it looks like people's names are changing. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's everybody's names changing. I should check out my own name on here at some point. Hopefully I haven't changed too much. Let's see. Another one, you can see deliberately, what looks like a deliberate erasure of the C before the O, which has a line over it. Let's see. Another one where the C is erased. And the second M is present. Another one where the O is weirdly spaced out away from the M to make it less obviously, so the erasure less obvious, but it does seem to be, previously there was erased some COM, and that has been erased and O has been written in a similar color ink. And we go on. There's more. This is another one, clearly erased, both the C and the mark over the O in one big erasure. And another one where there's a C that's been erased. We're still in the 9th century. So there's some in the 9th century that seem to have omitentes, but a lot that have comitentes that has subsequently been altered. But we'll also notice is that the author of this has gone through and as well identified in all these cases, is there a Johannine comma with the text? Because the prologue, then the epistle of James, the 2 epistles of Peter, then 1 John, and is the comma in those texts? And for most of these, the answer is no, there isn't a comma in the text. Even on, let's say, this one.
So I'm pretty sure what he's saying here is in the Bible text, because this is a prologue to 1 John, to basically that section of the Catholic epistles, and in some of those texts, like Codex Valdensis, in the main text, it doesn't have the comma Johannine in it, but in when we're looking at the prologue, it has written that unfaithful translators were omitting that type of thing.
Okay, so on this one it says omit, and there is a comma in the text, although the text says filius instead of verbum. So it's not the same comma, but
so I guess that would follow like Wycliffe's type of reading.
It's a variant version of the comma there.
Or Wycliffe follows him.
On this one, though, which someone has erased it to make it omitentes, there was no comma. This one, where someone erased it, no comma. And the evidence just piles up and piles up. Now, granted, when you start to get into the 11th century and beyond, the omitentes takes over and the presence of the comma takes over. But in these earlier years, the comitentes. Oh, here's another one. You can see, like, unfortunately, you can't see here because it's not. He doesn't take a picture of all the Johannine comma sections, but you can see that the half of the verse was erased to insert the comma into the main text as well. And here, no Johannine comma, but someone did add it in the margin. Here, the C is erased, and no comma J. And it goes on and on and on like this. In the 8th, 9th, and even the 10th centuries, there's just a mountain of evidence like this. Now, that's not to say that all the manuscripts lack the comma, nor that all the manuscripts have the prologue. And there are some that don't have the prologue and do have the comma. I think there's also some that don't have the prologue and don't have the comma. But the evidence is, notice this comitentes, but no comma Johannine. So what are we going to do with all of this? This is somewhat of a messy situation. I said an important update here, that it's comitentes attach or join and not omitentes omit. But what are you going to make of this then if it's join, not omit? So somebody argued, I think it was maybe Stephen Avery or someone else had argued, well, maybe all these changes are changes to the text because comitatus doesn't make any sense. So they're just changing it because it's obviously it's a typo. Although it's kind of funny that it's just obviously a typo, but it's in almost all the 8th, 9th, and 10th century manuscripts that have it. Not all, but almost all have comitatus. And the oldest one from the 6th century has comitatus. So what are we going to do with that? What are we going to do with that data? What will this sentence mean? What would be the meaning of this if it's actually saying that the unfaithful translators have added the testimony of the Father, the Word, and the Spirit? So the question of what would this sentence mean? Well, I'll say this. The positive side of it is it makes much more sense that someone who's pretending at least to be Jerome would acknowledge that the translators added it rather than saying that the translators subtracted it, because the Greek doesn't have it. The Greek manuscripts of that age don't have it. The Greek author.
Okay, so we're sort of getting into, okay, Greek doesn't have it and this doesn't have it, but like, to me, if you've only just tuned in, because I let TurretinFan talk for quite a while there, but Grantley MacDonald at the end of the website blogspot, The Father's True Monarchy, he is an expert in Latin, someone who TurretinFan would respect in a sense, where he is defending the critical text side of things, and he sees this as a complete nothing burger, really. He's like, okay, well, it's an interesting thing that scribes have done this, but and he's an expert in Latin, so I think I would go with, I would trust what he's saying about that. Okay, TurretinFan's voice seems to drop out for a tiny little while.
Can you hear me now? Hopefully you can. Sorry about that. Test. All right, we're back. Sorry about that. All right. Hopefully you can hear me now. That'd be great if you can just let me know that you hear me. Let's see. Okay, good. At least one person can. All right, so thank you for that. So what are we going to do with this sentence, which says, if they were faithfully translating into Latin, they wouldn't have the variety of words clash against itself. So what's this clash of words against itself that's illustrated in the text? Well, the clash of words arises when, in a superfluous way, you add in, not omit, but you add in the testimony of the Father, the Word, and the Spirit. Now you have this odd clash between the testimony of the water, blood, and Spirit, which is in the text, in the Greek, and this other testimony of the Father, the Word, and the Spirit. Now, again, we have to speculate. Some of the early versions of the comma have the water, the blood, and the Spirit are one in Christ Jesus. Some of them have just these three are one. And then when it says the Father, the Word, and the Spirit, sometimes it says, in the same way, the Father, the Word, and the Spirit. These are one. And so and then sometimes it says Father, Son, and Spirit instead of Father, Word, and Spirit. So there's a variety of readings of this Latin insertion. But on any of them, we're just going to take the version that's in the prologue. On any of these versions, the testimony of the Father, the Word, and the Spirit, is the point that that's what strengthens the Catholic faith? Or is it better to understand this, that it's only the three words, the water, the blood, and the Spirit? Those are what strengthen the Catholic faith. And those, the water, the blood, and the Spirit, are what establish the one substance of the divinity of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And that by inserting this second parallel thing, you destroy the spiritual meaning of water, blood, and Spirit.
Okay, so obviously TurretinFan doesn't think that the Father, Word, and Spirit is there. So he's sort of saying, well, by adding this other meaning, it sort of destroys the spiritual type of meaning behind it, the allegory behind it. That's usually one of the main thoughts, is that because Augustine, or Augustine, however you want to say it, because he said it was an allegory of the water, the blood, and the Spirit, that's usually that type of label is put upon everyone. So when Cyprian quotes it, oh no, he was just doing an allegory. Tertullian, okay, it's just an allegory. So everything just is an allegory because one guy said it, with authority. And so instead of taking people for their what they're saying themselves in their own words, like someone like Cyprian, who was not really given to allegories and that type of thing. He was usually very verbatim. It's just put upon him, and it's like, oh, that's just an allegory. So TurretinFan sort of saying that by having this here, the Father, the Word, and the Spirit, it can muddy things, and it can cause people to, I guess, not see the allegory for themselves, but they're sort of forcing on this, the water, blood, and Spirit, this type of interpretation.
Because you're saying that those are not referring to the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, because you've now inserted Father, Son, and Spirit into the text. And you've created what this author describes as a clash against itself in the variety of words. And that this is especially true about the unity of the Trinity. So the author seems to be saying, if I understand it correctly, that the original text, which just says only the three words, water, blood, and spirit, that this proclaims the unity of substance of the divinity of the Father, of the Son, and of the Spirit. The Son being the blood, the Spirit being the water, the water in the water, blood, and Spirit, water being the Holy Spirit, which is hovering above the waters, the blood being Christ, whose blood, and God the Father, who is Spirit, being Spirit. That these three are one is undermined by putting in Father, Word, and Spirit afterwards. That seems to be the argument that's being made. It is a bit confusing, partly because we generally interpret, when we hear that the Father, Word, and Spirit are one, we tend to interpret that in an Orthodox sense, not in a sense that clashes with Orthodoxy. But of course, at the time when this was written, these insertions were rather new, not universally accepted, not necessarily even widely accepted at that point, but certainly they were in existence at that point when this was composed. So if that's the case, if it is to be understood as comitentes, like the earliest versions have, and if the reason why people changed it from comitentes to omitentes is so that they can also justify putting in the Johannine comma into their text and accepting it, so they had to flip the meaning of this prologue by just flipping the meaning of one word, although rendering the rest a little bit confusing in terms of how is there a clash of words? How can a variety of words clash against themselves, especially in a place where supposedly the error is omitting something important? That doesn't make much sense. But again, the whole prologue is not the most beautiful Latin.
Okay, so he's still got that mindset that he's seen from Migne and others who didn't really know about Fuldensis, and they've sort of demonized the prologue and said it's Pseudo-Jerome and all that sort of stuff. So he's still got that mindset, and then he's reading into it that this is an important variation where people who are very anti-comma and would have a barrier to push and would use this information if they found it persuasive, who know the Latin, have just said no, it's really a nothing burger. And other people you can check out, like on Facebook, James Snap Jr. He brings this issue up February 27, 2020, and he says, everyone has been getting it wrong for so long, But even TurretinFan said, look, in some of these, they do have footnotes saying that it has comitentes. So they knew about it and they didn't see it as a huge issue. And I would suggest that Migne would probably be an expert in Latin, knowing his stuff. Now, whether or not he can just read some of Jerome in one spot and go, oh, it's not him in another, that's a whole different issue. But whether he knew Latin, of course he did. He's writing in Latin here. He's many times writing his own commentary on the Latin in Latin. So obviously he knows what he is on about.
To begin with, and it's not Jerome's Latin anyway. So I don't know where this leaves us all. I think that I see everyone's now catching up to my audio problems, but they're saying they can hear me. I think there was a brief period where I was muted, but it happens when I fiddle too much with my microphone here. The computer decides that I'm trying not to connect a mic and it shuts me off. All right, well, okay, so this leaves us with, as I said, I've offered to the advocates of the Johannine comma, I'll happily debate this point. I would be, considering what the original text is, that it's comitentes, I'd be happy if this were Jerome himself saying that these other scribes unfaithfully joined in a testimony that then undermines what the original text says. I'd be happy to have that. I'm also happy if it's not Jerome, because I think it's hard to imagine Jerome making such a serious blunder about the order of the Greek epistles, especially since the order as given by like 5 different Greek sources doesn't align with that. Now, of course, John Damascene was after Jerome, so he couldn't be referring to John Damascene, but the order of Athanasius would have been before him, and many other orders as well. We don't see this, the Orthodox Greeks putting Peter's epistles first, but we do see that apparently with Cassiodorus, and it's this age of Cassiodorus where these epistles are also sometimes referred to as the canonical epistles instead of referring to them as the Catholic epistles. So we seem like we've probably narrowed this down to being from the age of Cassiodorus. Now, whether it's from Cassiodorus himself or someone else, I don't know. I don't think we'll ever know. I hope it's not from Cassiodorus himself. That would hopefully be beneath him to do that. But someone from that age, using terminology that was more available at that time, that seems to be the source of this. It also,
and like I'm saying, I think 100 and what was it, 20 years or 126 years after Jerome died, I don't think the Latin would have changed that much in that period of time. It could have, but I think it's more so this is just being adopted by Migne, who didn't really have the full understanding of Codex Valdensis.
It also seems as though, although in not a very clear way, that the author is trying to justify the non-presence of this Johannine comma. And he's saying that unfaithful translators who strayed from the faith and threw it in to undermine the consubstantiality of the Father, Son, and Spirit.
So I think what we're seeing now is this is because of this issue, TurretinFan is adopting wholeheartedly what's seen in the Father's True Monarchy website, where now it's sort of been said that the prologue has been read wrong for so long. I'm sure that Erasmus and many other people, Lorenzo Valla, Cardinal Bessarion, many people who were just, these guys basically would speak Latin all day long, that they were aware of these issues because, they all had manuscripts, specifically like, Erasmus, he would have known of these issues. He talks about them, the prologue in his annotations. Now I'll just see if I can get Raising the Ghost of Arius. I'll open that up and see if I can find that spot. But I think that they didn't see it as an issue. While it looks like a big issue, and it's a very interesting thing to visually see that type of thing, it looks like something that was just commonly fixed, and people didn't have an issue with that, and even to the point where like you were saying at the bottom of some of these pages, it did have the, some other readings say this, but they haven't really made this an argument. Where I think if they were against the reading of the comma, this would be a huge argument if this was true.
And the way that would seem to work is by undermining it by saying that this is just saying that there are three in heaven who are one in testimony and not one in anything else. But who knows? It's hard to know because as I said, the Latin is not a model of clarity as to its meaning. And on the one hand, you could actually try to interpret competentes actually as in a way that means the same as omitentes.
So that's what I'm saying too. Like when I said earlier, TurretinFan sort of goes, well, you could sort of go either way with it. I think people who have a better grasp on the Latin than most people around today, like, back in the Reformation period, people were just eating, drinking, sleeping Latin. These people would have pointed this issue out, I think. And because they were using manuscripts, we're finding manuscripts. So some of these they were the main manuscript in like a museum or in a library or in a church. And so people were often looking at these things, and like pretty much everyone was just speaking Latin. So I don't think that it is as big a deal as thought. But I can understand why Turretin is interested in this. When I first saw it, I was very interested in it as well. But I came to this conclusion.
But then why are so many people in so many different manuscripts altering the manuscript in order to change it from competentes to omitentes? And again, just to say, well, it doesn't make much sense, just presumes that it doesn't make much sense because the person thinks that the text should have the Johannine comma. But almost all of these prologues, the early ones, are with manuscripts that don't have the Johannine comma, unless they have the omitentes modification in the original hand. So bottom line, that's where I stand on this particular topic for now. I'm holding myself out somewhat tentative on some of these points because I don't feel like I have I feel like there's still questions that could be asked, partly because the argument is so bad that this undermines the substantiality of the Father, Son, and Spirit. But it's also bad because it was bad originally because it doesn't establish the consubstantiality of the Father, Son, and Spirit in the original, if this were original. But in any event, I think it makes better sense of the overall flow of the letter to say that the clash of words against themselves are present in the unfaithful translations because they throw in something that doesn't belong there, rather than that there's a clash of words because something's left out. But anyway, let's see. The other thing, following up on last week's episode, I did have a chance finally to listen to both David Allen's arguments about it was 1 John, about 1 John 5:1 and not 5:7, and also to James White's rebuttals to those arguments. And I'm somewhat champing at the bit, wanting to get into answering David Allen's points. Although I think Dr. White already did a great job doing so, but it's just so. Anyway, it's hard to resist the kind of the chum in the water and the sharks smell blood. So we all want to go take a bite out of that terrible argument that was offered by Dr. Allen. So I don't know if I'll have time to get to it this week. I hope that those who are celebrating Thanksgiving will do so to the God's glory, and that they'll have a happy Thanksgiving. And let's see, I'll go through the comments if there's any outstanding comments on the substance. And let's see, and also just thank everyone who's been here. Thanks to Algo, thanks to the Daily Gripe, thanks to Frenny Cosmic, thanks to Michelle Chori, KJV. Let's see. It says, go to the trouble of changing it so it'll be easier for pronounce. YouTube just goes back, nope, I don't think you will. Yeah. Let's see. Maybe people abused it. That's my best guess. Matthew Cheevers, good to see you here. Thanks for joining us. The Daily Gripe. Daily Gripe had extra stuff before. I don't know. Anyway, Daily Gripe is here. Says, so many people altering manuscripts led me to believe that even early writings by Tertullian could have been impacted. Well, they could have. This is one of the problems. We have a doctrine of the perseverance of, well, not the perseverance exactly, that's not the word, preservation. We have a doctrine of the preservation of Scripture. We don't have a doctrine of the preservation of the Pseudo-Jeromean Prologue, or even of Jerome himself, or certainly not of Tertullian, or of Tertullian's writings. Some of them have been manipulated over time. Some of them have been altered. Sometimes we catch these alterations. Sometimes we catch the forgeries. Sometimes we don't. It's dangerous to put too much trust in man. Of course, we should value the insights of previous generations, no doubt. But we need to be on alert to the fact that human beings make mistakes, and there are some human beings who have corrupted writings. Thankfully, the scribes were not, in general, did not go through and just erase parts of 1 John and write what they want to write in there instead. But they were, although they were seemingly, at least in the ones that I looked at from the 8th, 9th, and 10th century so far, and I plan to issue a blog post on the same topic, God willing, in the next week. But it seems like they were more reluctant to go and erase God's word in the text, but they would sometimes add the in terra, in the earth part, and then put in a little footnote or a marginal indication, and then at the margin put in the rest of the comma, which was not in the original hand of the manuscript. They were comfortable adding it in, but thankfully they were not so comfortable at erasing anything. So what we end up with, after so many years of conservative, that's a conservative scribe, what we end up with is a lot of texts which preserve the original, but which have some accretions that need to be removed. And in the case of the Latin, it seems inarguable that this is also an accretion to the Latin. This is not something that Jerome put in 1 John. That's why it's not just these ones that have the prologue that don't have the Johannine comma. There are ones that don't have the prologue that don't have the Johannine comma. There are also, I think, at least one that doesn't have the prologue that does have the Johannine comma. But the point is that it's not a matter of just the prologue itself. It's a matter of the fact that Jerome's Vulgate didn't have this. It was added in later. And that's what Mr. Houghton, whatever his name is, it's one of his arguments. Interestingly, the earliest clear citation is to this work, or to this writing, is Priscillian, apparently, who's not the most orthodox himself. But let's see. All right, let me wrap things up a little bit more. Michelle says she learned early on not to use this when arguing for the Trinity. Yeah, there are, the Westminster Confession, when they were adding in proof texts, in one of the early editions, they added in a proof text of this text. It's easy for people to go there. It's not the best place. It's really not the best place from which to argue, partly because the Greek is pretty clear that it's not original. I mean, there are close calls in textual criticism where it's not easy to see which is the original. This isn't one of those. This one, it is very easy to see that it's not original. It's even easy to see that it's not originally in the Vulgate. It is Old Latin, but it's not Vulgate. So, yeah. Let's see, I know that none of mine are either outstanding or on the substance. I'm not sure what that's a reference to, Franny. But all right. So all right, well, thanks everyone. I really appreciate you being here. I'm wishing you a happy Thanksgiving, as I mentioned earlier. And we'll see, if God gives me the time to do something responding to David Allen, I will try to. But yeah, happy Thanksgiving, everyone, and God be with you.
Okay, so just in summary there, and so just looking on Stephen Avery's blog, and he's written a lot about this back in the day. And so one thing I was just reading through, which is quite interesting, talking about where this information is coming from. Okay, so we're reading Migne, and he's talking about certain issues, and talking about Richard Simon, and he's getting information from him. But the whole thing about it being a forgery, so the original forgery accusation developed in the later 1600s. Christopher Sandius and Richard Simon beginning the new appraisal. The lateness of all extant Vulgates with the prologue was a major emphasis. So the major thing is, it's like, well, it's so far detached from Jerome. Obviously, someone just put it in later. And that's why it has that label of Pseudo-Jerome. And so I can understand if people don't know that, they can just think that, Nick's just a King James onlyist who's just a stick in the mud, who just wishes that it would be like that. But knowing that during the Reformation period, they saw it as genuine, both the Catholics and the Protestants. And it's later on, you got, Richard Simon, Christopher Sandius saying, okay, it's Pseudo-Jerome, coming from around 800. And then 1960, Ernest Ranke he collates Codex Valdensis, shows that the prologue's earlier than the time of Jerome. It was produced under the auspices of Victor of Capua, who was considered rather learned, yet with a notable exception of two, like Charles Vincent Dolman and the Dublin Review, there was little in the way of reappraisal of the forgery opinion. So it's basically a forgery because it's, they didn't have early attestation to it, but then they found early attestation to it, but yet, like I was saying, when people have abuse charges put on them, it just sticks. And people just, for some reason, they go, well, someone somewhere said it's a forgery. They know, I don't. And so it's just a forgery. And then, what I've seen with this video, TurretinFans reading old information, which should be just considered redundant or taken, like with a grain of salt. And we see here, it says the prologue has been seen a forgery largely based on internal arguments that were given by Jean Martinier. So he's the guy, and it was in 1693 in the Benedictine edition of Jerome's writings. And so that's exactly what Migne was talking about. He's basically getting it from people, getting that type of information from people who were hundreds of years before. You're looking at 150 years beforehand. People are talking about it and saying from internal evidence, well, we've only got old manuscripts. Let's look at the internal evidence. And when you look at the internal evidence, most of it is based around the whole false premise that there is no early attestation for it. When they find early attestation for it, those arguments should just fizz out, really. But people still want to hang on to them, and it's almost like being cleared of abuse charges. You didn't bash your wife, we proved that, but everyone's still like, I think he bashed his wife. It's just, how do you get rid of a pseudo tag? And so knowing that we now have attestation that goes back, and at the end of the day, okay, Codex Valdensis, regardless of whether Jerome wrote it, I think he did. I mean, there's lots of evidence for that. Or just say he didn't. Okay, well, I don't think that, but just say he didn't. The Comia Hanium is written in there. And someone from that period of time, early on in 546, is saying unfaithful translators are removing this. Now, I know the whole argument is remove or whatever, but they're discussing this is an issue then. It's not just an issue in Erasmus's time. It's not just an issue around, 1250 or whatever, people talk about. This is an issue like around the 550s. And so to me, that speaks volumes as well. Regardless of who wrote it, it's the comma and it's mentioned there. And so that speaks volumes. To me, Jerome wrote that preface. It's very, very clear that we have early attestation for it in Codex Valdensis, dated at 546. So there is a huge difference between having a late prologue of 800 and finding something that's only like 125 years after Jerome died. And so, I think that's about it. So, I actually appreciate TurretinFan doing this video. And there's lots of information on Stephen Avery's Pure Bible Forum. And so I'll go through these comments and then I'll pack it up. So Effective Nutrition says, what's the name of the guy talking? I've been looking for this guy. His name's TurretinFan. So if you type in TurretinFan, you will get there. James Sheffield says Jerome, being a student of Gregory Nazianzus, probably got his information from him. Okay, very interesting. Effective Nutrition says, is Revolution his YouTube channel? Oh, you might be talking about me. Yeah, my name's Nick, and this is my channel. So, yeah, I guess just if you're on YouTube, just click down the bottom there, Revolution Debates. If you type in Revolution Nick Sayers, you'll get there. I remember seeing him on another streaming channel. Okay. All right, guys. Well, God bless you. It's 1 a.m, and I've got to be up about 5, so I'll get about 4 hours sleep. But I thought that I would deal with this while it was hot off the press. And because I've got quite a lot to say about it, hopefully it went through. And you got the understanding that I think the whole textual variant there is a nothing burger. And I think when TurretinFan goes through this, he will probably agree with me. And this is one of the things with, because I know TurretinFan's watching this, I think it's healthy for us to actually go through all this and to sort of bounce off each other like, okay, well, this is what these guys are saying, or this is what Stephen Avery's saying, or this is what Mignay's saying, this is what Metzger's saying, and just keep checking information. So then when or if, I don't mind debating on this, but when we do that type of debate, we've gotten a whole bunch of other stuff sorted out already by the time we get there. So, yeah, God bless you. Yeah, I thought you were talking about TurretinFan. Okay, guys, God bless you. I'll play my outro, but I will see you again very soon.